to give us open-ended feedback about everything you think, your questions, your fears, your aspirations. It's whatever you want to tell us that you think that people who are working to implement the act, and that needs to include all of you. So what actually we're doing today is we're co-creating. We're beginning to co-create the program that is going to unfold over the next few years. And it's a crucial program. Water is life. Without water, there's nothing. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Norm. So our first presenter this morning is Dr. Neely Dunbar. Title of her presentation is The Increasing Water Scarcity Challenge. She's the very recently former state geologist director with New Mexico Bureau of Geology, and thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. My name is Nelia Dunbar, and I am a very recently Emerita Director and State Geologist. So I work at the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources, and being Emerita, I am really privileged to be able to continue to work on behalf of New Mexico going forward. So thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. And what I'm going to talk about in the next 25 minutes or so is a report that was prepared to think about how climate change in New Mexico over the next 50 years will impact water resources. And in the context of the meeting today, specifically about the increasing water scarcity challenge that our state will be facing. Having an advance problem here.
Just hit the arrow or on the clicker?
I'm doing the arrow, I'm doing the clicker.
It's not.
It's like we're a little jammed.
Stop my clock.
Yeah. No, maybe. I think, yeah, I think so. Just the left and right.
Okay.
Sorry about
Okay.
that.
Oh, that's fine. Okay, so the report that I'm going to talk about today is titled Climate Change in New Mexico Over the Next 50 Years, Impacts on Water Resources. And this report was designed to be a quantitative and comprehensive look at how climate change over the next 50 years will impact water resources in New Mexico, thinking about this broadly from a number of different perspectives. This report was done collaboratively between the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources and the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. I was the convening scientist on this report, but much of the work on this report was done by an experienced team of scientists who have spent their careers working in New Mexico on a range of topics, including hydrology, ecology, geology, and climatology. And several of the authors are in the room with us today, which is great. The authors' names are listed here. I won't read through them, but I think many of you will recognize those names as people who've devoted their careers to a range of different science topics in New Mexico. And if there's any really hard questions, I'm going to look to Bruce and Phil to answer them later. So, and the ground rules of the report was to be an integration and compilation of existing data. The point of this was not to do new data, but was really to assess the current state of knowledge. and integrate the existing data. So we started this report in mid-2020, right after COVID started. So we had been envisaging, when we were planning this report, doing a lot of face-to-face meetings. In fact, we spent a lot of time on Zoom, which in some ways was fortuitous because it allowed all of us to be at the table. And we met every couple of weeks, had all the authors brainstorm, talk about the different topics we needed to talk about in the report, and really share a lot of ideas. So I think that process was quite effective. And then there was a lot of writing, and the first draft of the report was sent out for rigorous peer review. And I know some of the peer reviewers are also in this room, and I'd like to thank you for that. So we had a number, 5 different people who reviewed the entire report and a few people who reviewed specific chapters to really examine the scientific robustness of this report. We responded to those peer review comments to the best of our ability, and then the report was open for public comment. And I know many of you in this room at that point read the report and made public comments on the report, which we did our best to respond to. The report was published in December 2022. And I'd like to highlight something, which is that the Geologic Society of America presented us with the Fry Award, in which we received at the annual meeting of the Geological Society of America. And the Fry Award is for the best environmental geology publication published in the last 3 years by either a state survey or the Geological Society. And I think I was so thrilled to get that report. I think it was a real testament to the quality of this work. So you can find the report by going to the New Mexico Bureau of Geology website and searching for Bulletin 154. And I encourage any of you who haven't had a chance to look at this report to download it and look at it. Also in the handout that you got today, there are the plain language summaries for all the different chapters of the report there. So you can just read through those if you want. So the big question is, why do we need this? Why do we need to think about how climate change is going to impact water resources over the next 50 years? And the basic answer is that our climate is warming. And these 2 graphs show why we need to really be thinking carefully about climate change in New Mexico and water resources. These 2 graphs are both data. These are not models, but they are actual collected data from New Mexico between 1930 and 2020. The upper graph shows the average statewide temperature on an annual basis. So each of the dots on this shows temperature in a given year in New Mexico. To make this easier to see, we've also included decadal averages. So these bars, each of those bars shows a 10-year average of temperature. And I think it's fairly easy to see here that the decadal averages in temperature in New Mexico have been stepping up like a flight of stairs since the 1980s. So New Mexico temperature is increasing. Now, the flip side of this is precipitation. What is happening with precipitation? And the lower graph shows similar information to the upper graph, but shows average statewide precipitation instead of temperature. And you can see that there's a lot of variability, which shouldn't come to us, be a surprise to anyone in this room. There's a lot of variability in precipitation over year in New Mexico. But again, if you look at the decadal averages shown in the blue bar, there's no distinct increase in precipitation, which is too bad. I mean, on the plus side, there's no apparent decrease in precipitation either. So the basic message is temperature is going up, precipitation is not. Keep track of my time here. Okay, so. And what are we going to be looking at in the future? Am I doing that by stepping on a cable here? So this graph shows how New Mexico's climate is projected to warm in response to increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So the first part of this, the orange bar, shows the instrumental record that I showed in the last graph in terms of temperature. And then the green and the blues, or the green and the red swaths here, show 2 different projections going forward. One for a relatively higher amount of CO2 emissions into the atmosphere and one for a relatively lower amount. But in either case, we see the temperature over the next 50 years in New Mexico is going to continue to climb in response directly to atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases. Okay, so now that's kind of setting the stage. Now I'm going to go back and talk about the study again for a few minutes. And as I mentioned, the ground rules of the study were to assess and synthesize recent scientific literature. And we decided to, this was one of the first things we talked about, is kind of what fields were we going to focus on in the report. And the things that we chose to focus on, and these are reflected in chapters in the report, are future climate projections, changes to the surface water budget, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, ecological dynamics, which is a really important part of this story, impact on soils. People don't think much about soils. Soils are really important from a number of perspectives. So there is a chapter dedicated to how climate change is going to impact soils. Landscape change, fire, and erosion. We're already living in this world of landscape change in response to fire and erosion associated with that. Surface water and groundwater and the interactions between surface water and groundwater. Sedimentation in rivers. This was not part of the original report. We added this chapter in response to public comment on the report. Extreme precipitation and flooding, and finally water quality. So here are some of the high level conclusions of the report. Going forward in New Mexico, we're going to see lower stream flow and lower recharge to aquifers because of increased aridity in our state. We'll see greater interannual variability in precipitation with more very dry years interspersed with some very wet years. We'll see more extreme precipitation events, more hotter and severe droughts. We'll see increase or decreasing snowpack, and also a change in when runoff is going to happen. Runoff is going to trend earlier, and also diminishing runoff because of diminishing snowmelt. Greater demands on groundwater because of less surface water, vegetation stress, increasing catastrophic forest fires, increased flooding and sedimentation in rivers, irreversible damage to soils, and degraded quality of surface water. So not a great picture. And I think, you know, when Norm talks about the urgency of the situation we're in, this summarizes what we're looking at. It's not a, it's a challenge, many challenges. Okay, so in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about a few different parts of the report. And in one of the early slides, I showed future climate projections. This is another visualization of that. So this shows past temperature. This goes from 1950 to 2070. Past temperature that's historically measured, future temperature going forward. So we're looking at an average of probably about 5 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit increase over the next 50 years. And every place in the state will warm, but the warming is non-uniform across the state. So the northwest corner of the state, the San Juan Basin area, is warming at a slightly more rapid rate than, say, the boot heel of the state. But every place is warming. Precipitation, again, as I mentioned earlier, our average precipitation is not projected to change significantly. However, the interannual variability is likely to change. And I think that's a part of the precipitation story. There is also some modeled information about how precipitation across the state may vary going forward. And these 4 maps, so this is obviously New Mexico, green means higher level of precipitation, brown means lower compared to today. And
I think it was flickering. I was trying to fix it. My apologies, everyone.
so once that graph comes back, I'll just give you a synopsis of this. But the basic message is that in the winter, the boot heel of the state is likely to be a little bit drier relative to today, whereas the northern mountains in the winter are likely to be a little wetter than they are today.
Austin. Austin, can you come?
And in the spring, in much of the state is going to be relatively drier than it is today. In the autumn, the state may be on average a little bit wetter than it is today. And then in the summer, the monsoon in the boot heel is likely to intensify, whereas the northeast part of the state in the summer may be drier than it is today. And while we're sorting this out, does anyone have any questions that I could address?
Could you say what you just said?
Sure, yeah. So going forward, the projection, and again, this is modeled, of course, it's in the future, so we don't really know exactly what will happen. But what we can project is that going forward, the where precipitation falls, how much precipitation falls in different parts of the state may vary a little bit more by season. And I think the strongest data indicate that in the winter, the northern mountains, the northern part of the state may be wetter, and the southwest, the boot heel, will be drier relative to today. And in the summer, that's flipped. The boot heel may get more intense monsoonal rain, and the northeast part of the state may be relatively drier. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is the land surface water budget in New Mexico's arid climate. And this work was put together by Fred Phillips, who has spent his career as a hydrologist at New Mexico Tech. Many of you probably know Fred. And this is something that as a non-hydrologist, I was really not aware of, and really kind of surprised me about what happens to water precipitation that falls in New Mexico. So this cartoon summarizes what happens to precipitation that falls in New Mexico, whether it's rain or snow. So in an average year in New Mexico, we get about 95 million acre feet of precipitation. So where does that precipitation go? If you'd asked me before I was involved in this report, I would have said, oh, probably about half of it goes into recharge and runoff, and about half of it is evapotranspirated. In fact, that would have been completely wrong, because much of the water that falls as precipitation on New Mexico is either transpired, which means it's taken up by plants and released through the leaves of plants, or it is directly evaporated out of soil. So falls onto soil and then directly goes back into the atmosphere. So when you add together those two terms of evaporation and transpiration, which are often called evapotranspiration, that is 92 million acre feet of the 95 million acre feet of precipitation that falls in New Mexico, only leaving a quite small amount, 1.5 million acre feet, that goes into runoff, which is precipitation that falls and ends up in rivers, or into recharge, which is precipitation that percolates down through the soil and ends up in our aquifers. So these are a very small part of the entire water budget in New Mexico. And another impact of this, if you think about even a very small percent increase in transpiration and evaporation, will have a very big impact on runoff and recharge. Okay, so the message there is, even with no trend in precipitation, no decrease in precipitation, New Mexico will become more arid because of the increasing air temperature. And the amount of water that can be held or absorbed by air increases as a function of temperature. And a 2 Fahrenheit increase in air temperature leads to the air being able to absorb 7% more moisture. So the impact of that is that liquid water will be lost more rapidly from leaves and soil. And also another element of this that any New Mexican is familiar with is that dry soil absorbs precipitation more effectively than wet soil. So drier soil in general will absorb more precipitation that then will not end up in runoff or recharge. So the basic message is aridity will increase and we'll get more severe droughts. Now, there's a term that atmospheric scientists and hydrologists use, which is called the aridity index. And what the aridity index is, the average potential evapotranspiration. So the amount of moisture that's taken up by plants and expired by plants or is evaporated from soil. That number over the average precipitation. And the scale here, the aridity index, anything that is dark blue means that there's excess water. So there's more precipitation than evapotranspiration. And you can see pretty clearly that the parts of New Mexico where they're the least arid are the high mountain regions, which is not a surprise to anyone. As the scale gets redder, that means you're looking at increased aridity. So the Boot Heel, the southeast part of the state, and the San Juan Basin are some of the more arid parts of the state, which again, is pretty intuitively clear to people who live in New Mexico. So this map here shows historical aridity index, so between 1970 and 2020. The map on the right shows a future projection of aridity index in the state. And you can see that the patterns are quite similar between those two maps. You know, the areas that are red get a little bit redder, the areas that are blue get a little bit less blue. But the next graph I'm going to show you, and this is a little bit complicated. The next graph I'm going to show you shows you the proportional increase in aridity index. So Fred Phillips, who did these, basically differenced these two maps quantitatively to see where aridity is going to increase proportionately the most. And I think this next graph is one of the most valuable, a very valuable thing that came out of the study. So what this shows, darker colors show parts of the state that are going to get proportionately more arid over the next 50 years. And so you see that the parts of the state that are already very arid are going to get more arid, but proportionately less arid. The parts of the state that are going to be most impacted by increased aridity are the high mountain regions. And these are the parts of the state that really drive a lot of our recharge. So that's not a great piece of information in terms of recharge and runoff in New Mexico. That the parts of the state that are going to get the most proportionally arid are the northern mountains, the Sacramentos, and the Gila area. Okay, and now I'm going to go through a few highlights from other chapters. The snowpack and spring stream flow is projected to decline. These are 4 different models for how that decline will happen. There's variability between the models, but the basic message is that both snowpack and stream flow will decline going forward. And part of having a more arid climate is that forest health is impacted. And so you can see this is, these are piñons near Santa Fe. This is when the piñon die off, and this is the dead piñon that resulted from that. And of course, when you have a lot of dead forests, that leads to wildfires. And wildfires, then when there's precipitation, particularly extreme precipitation, you get this very extreme runoff. You can see these big runnels. This picture's from the Jemez Mountains. This is a really dramatic example. You know, this farm gate was not built with a giant pile of boulders behind it. That was the result of an extreme precipitation event in an area that had been burned, that moved a lot of sediment very quickly. Extreme precipitation is an interesting part of the whole picture here. And we do know that based on increased atmospheric moisture and temperature, more extreme precipitation would be expected in New Mexico. The 2 climatologists who worked on this, Dave Gutzler and Dave Dubois, they examined the information from New Mexico, and based on the statistical patterns of rainfall in New Mexico, you can't distinctly project that we will get increased extreme precipitation. From first principles, we should. However, Dave Gutzler was also involved in the International Panel on Climate Change report, and they were working on precipitation in the Southwest as a whole. And when you integrate the entire Southwest US, you can statistically model that we are getting and should expect more extreme precipitation going forward. Okay. New Mexico's rivers. So over the next 50 years, flow in rivers should decline between about 16 and 28%. And due to extreme precipitation and wildfire driven disruption of watersheds, the amount of sediment delivered to rivers will double. And the beds of undammed rivers will build up, reservoir capacity will be reduced, and channels will narrow. Water quality, this is a chapter Bruce Thompson worked on, and Bruce took a look at a lot of information from the New Mexico Environment Department. And in terms of one of the conclusions that Bruce had is there's a lot of information about water quality, but that hasn't been particularly synthesized. However, what I'll mention is that temperature impairments are something that we're really going to face going forward. So the things that really stood out were temperature impairments, eutrophication, which means excess nutrients, and E. coli are the things that may impact water resources going forward. Now, I think all of you who live in New Mexico know that we don't have a flat state like Kansas. You know, we've got a very topographically complex state. It's also a pretty, from north to south, New Mexico is a pretty big state. So we decided as part of the report to really examine statewide and regional impacts around the state. And we broke the state into 4 parts. So the first part is the high mountains, which are in northern New Mexico here, the Dalamogyon volcanic field here, the Gila Mountains and the Sacramento Mountains. And we think that the impacts of climate change in those regions will be similar. Region 2 is the Northwest High Desert. So the San Juan Basin and running south, down towards the Dalamogyon volcanic field. 3 is the Rio Grande Valley here. And this should say Southwest Basin, it says Southeast, but the Southwest Basin is basically the Boot Heel and the Rio Grande. And then the Eastern Plains are divided into one region that should all, we thought about splitting this into 2 different regions, but it seemed like the impacts were relatively similar. And in one of the chapters of the report, we go through and examine how climate change is going to impact water resources in different parts of the state. And again, I think harking back to this map that shows where aridity is going to increase the most, you basically see that same pattern of the way we divided out the state in how aridity index will increase. So very quickly, I'm going to summarize the dominant impacts by region. In the high mountains, these will be the most impacted by climate change in New Mexico. So water resources in the high mountains are going to be most impacted. There will be less snow melt and there'll be higher evapotranspiration. Changes to plant communities and increased wildfire are going to really impact the high mountain regions, but the impacts of that will be felt throughout the state. Because when you burn the high mountain regions, you increase runoff, you decrease infiltration, and you increase sedimentation. In the Northwest high deserts, the main impact is going to be loss of soils. There'll be increased dustiness as a result of that, increased arroyo incision, and possible transitions from grasses to shrubs, which actually are a little bit of a positive because shrubs consume less water than grasses. So there'd be more water for infiltration. In the Southwest basins and the Rio Grande Valley, there'll be lower river flow. So projected 25% lower flow in the Rio Grande 50 years hence. And there'll also be changes in timing of runoff trending earlier. There will also be greater loss of water from reservoirs. So with a 5-degree temperature increase, Elephant Butte will lose an additional 2 feet to evaporation in a year, which is a lot. The Eastern Plains. Eastern Plains are going to be the part of the state most impacted by extreme precipitation events. As in the Northwest high desert, there'll also be loss of soil, increased desertification, and increased dustiness. So I think I am about out of time here, but I think one of the important parts about doing a report like this, I still have some time? Okay. I think one of the values of getting together a bunch of scientists who worked in New Mexico and really examining what we know and what we don't know is that by knowing what we don't know, it provides a roadmap for young scientists to embark on their careers and do things that are really going to be societally relevant to New Mexico. And so as a group, we brainstormed. I asked each of the authors to think about what are the biggest unknowns in their field. And in the next 2 slides, I'll just summarize those. Precipitation is a big one. And I think better assessment of extreme precipitation in New Mexico and also the seasonality. I showed that one slide that had the 4 maps of New Mexico showing how seasonality of precipitation may change. Better understanding of that would be really valuable. Also, a better understanding of snow and snowmelt runoff and how that is going to impact the water balance in New Mexico. Modeling. Models are a valuable way to kind of look into the future. However, fine-tuning climate models would be very valuable for our state. And this is not only thinking about global circulation models and global climate models, but also hydrologic models. So having more finely calibrated hydrologic models for recharge and runoff in New Mexico would be really valuable. Understanding of clouds was something that the climatologists also pointed to as something that needs to be better understood in our state. Also, simpler vegetation dynamic models that incorporate disturbance processes. And I'm not an ecologist, so that doesn't make total sense to me, but Craig Allen was the ecologist on this. So anyone who's interested in that, feel free to reach out to Craig. He's wonderful and is incredibly knowledgeable. And then there are also observational data gaps. And I think this is something that we need to start. My mantra is any data you don't collect today will never be collected. And so, thinking about focusing on data and what data we need is important. And one big one is quantitative and geographically distributed measurements of New Mexico's aquifer water levels and making those data accessible to the public. I put that, not just because I work for the Bureau of Geology, but I think it's a really important thing, is as there's less surface water, people are going to be looking to groundwater. And many of you probably saw that great article in the New York Times that showed how groundwater, not just in the arid Southwest, but across the nation, is being depleted, and it's invisible. It's below the surface, and people don't think about it. And that's something that I think New Mexico is actually ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, and we need to be doing more and more of this work. Better understanding of soil moisture and how soil moisture impacts soil health. Impact of climate change on water quality. This is something that Bruce Thompson really pointed out. Hydrologic response of watersheds to vegetation changes. Ann Tillery, who works for the USGS, was the main person working on this. And she recognized that there's a long way to go in terms of really being able to predict how extreme precipitation is going to affect, all right, I got off track there for a minute, but how vegetation changes in watersheds are going to impact runoff versus recharge. Timing of landscape readjustment to climate disturbance. This was really Ann Tillery's thing. I jumped ahead there for a minute. Studies of soil, plant communities, landscape characteristics in high elevation mountain ranges where recharge and runoff occur is another observational data, and long-term ecological monitoring and research to better understand responses of New Mexico's ecosystems to climate change and associated eco-hydrological responses. So thank you very much for your attention. And I think we might have a few minutes for questions.
One of the things that I've been wondering about is whether reservoirs are no longer a good way to store water. And I know Albuquerque has been pumping the extra water it's been getting from the Colorado distribution into its aquifers when possible. And I don't know enough about geology and like what underlies Elephant Butte or Caballo Dam or any of those other places where we store water. But is it possible to pump water back into an aquifer more directly than just letting it happen naturally?
Yes, it is. And I think that's something that a number of states around New Mexico have been doing for quite a long time. It's something you can't do. You have to be very careful when you do this, because the last thing you want to do is to contaminate or perturb an existing high quality aquifer. However, I do think, I'm seeing that New Mexico is starting to move in this direction. Interestingly, so the whole topic of managed aquifer recharge and whether that be passive by slowing down the water or active pumping, there is a lot of information in the scientific literature. And there was a National Academy 3-day webinar about managed aquifer recharge. And if you really want to dive into it, I would recommend looking for that. Interestingly, pre-Puebloan peoples were doing managed aquifer recharge. There's places in the landscape in New Mexico where you see small rock dams built that were designed to slow down overland water flow and put water back into the alluvial aquifers. So I think, I wouldn't go as far, and I might also see if Bruce or Phil has anything to add to this, but I'm not, I do think that managed aquifer recharge in whatever form it takes is something we need to be thinking very carefully about and thinking as part of our future. Bruce or Phil, do you have anything you'd like to add? John.
I've been trying to do that all my life, the last 60 years. It's like you say, you can be very careful, because if
you can make big mistakes.
yeah, but
doing this.
it's a wonderful opportunity, but there are places where it's like the Mesilla Basin, like the Albuquerque Basin, like the parts of the Columbus Basin, you know, the Ogallala. There are places where it's very good, but it's, I just watch out for what you wish for sometimes.
Yeah. And I think a positive aspect of this from New Mexico's perspective is that California and Arizona have been doing this for years, and we can learn from other states and that have been embarking on this process.
Would you please state your name before asking the question for the people who are on the hybrid session?
Pardon?
Would you please state your name before asking your question so the people on the hybrid session can know who's speaking?
He's answering the question.
The previous speaker was John Hawley. I'm Phil King. One thing I would say is that I don't see, aquifer storage is great. You still will need reservoir storage. You know, if you look at the hydrograph of the Rio Grande, if you go back to before Elephant Butte Dam, it was really a wild river, and you could see the variation. And as a matter of fact, we've made a lot of room in our aquifers where we can use them for storage. And so there certainly is a lot of potential for that. I don't think there's a big replacement for reservoir storage, but as another part of the mix.
Thanks. I would certainly echo what Phil just said.
Last question.
Apologize for being in the back room. Yeah, just James Steed with Spirit Farm. I'm just kind of looking at this, and it's a very linear geology, mining, stuff that seems to be very extractive in its nature, concept, and its whole premise. What consideration are you incorporating from a marginalized perspective, indigenous? We've always had this premise of scarcity in New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado. And indigenous people have always bounced up against sort of natural fractals that determine how we consume, how we use. The word that comes to my mind is the word Wahasa in Navajo, which means that it's water that's running over an edge, and what you do to maximize, what you do to capture, what you do to facilitate a sacredness about these droplets. I don't hear that in this presentation. I hear more very linear, bullet point perspective, but we haven't really examined sort of a keystone ecological culture that has been here for eons and have determined how to coexist with these natural forms and natural systems. And it seems like the settler community has come in and sort of dictated, what is crisis, what is scarcity. So I think I would like to see more of this influence of indigenous worldviews, lenses, epistemology, semantics, used so that it's more of a balance of what nature is trying to do is really come back into balance. So my question is, how are you incorporating these marginalized perspectives into what the mainstream crisis is taking place? To us, it's an opportunity. To us, it's always been adaptive and then move into transformative ways of cooperating with one another.
Yes, and actually speaking to that, this study was definitely envisaged as a Western science perspective, and there is a parallel group working on indigenous perspectives. And Hannah, can you help me out here? I'm trying to remember the name of the woman who was taking the lead on this, and her name has gone out of my mind. I'll look her name up and find it for you. But when we were first setting up this study, we worked hard to try to broaden perspectives, and we weren't able to get the engagement in this study. And so the path forward was to have a parallel study from looking at things from indigenous perspective and traditional knowledge. And I talked a lot, there's a person named Steve Semkin at Arizona State University who his model is two-eyed seeing. You know, you have the Western perspective, you have the indigenous perspective. You consider both of those perspectives in parallel. So I think that's something that we had very much on our minds, and it's something that I do hope comes together with this working with it. And I can give you more information about that. The woman's name just left my, I'm sure you know her. So. Lori Biaki, that's it, Lori Biaki, yeah. So you might want to reach out to her and see where things are going at this point.
The one thing I wanted to mention too is that in Western Apache, there was an indigenous medicine man that recently died that could predict 2 years into the future how that day, what the weather was going to be like that day. So there's a sophistication that we're totally missing out on.
Yes, and I think that the group that we had, the group that I was able to engage in this process did not have the tools to assess that. And that needs to be done by people who do have the tools to assess that. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more question?
We do not, but at the break would be a good time. All right, our next speaker is Christine Whitney Sanchez. The title of her talk is Real Change is Possible, and she's with Innovation Partners International of the Southwest and is the Chief Culture Officer.
Okay. We don't need another hero. I wish I could bring that to you like Tina Turner, but I can't quite pull that off this morning. The human history is really a grand story, and it's filled with juicy plots and dramatic overtones and interesting characters, lots of obstacles to overcome. And our stories from the past tend to have been hero stories, the hero journey kind of story, especially in the West. And that hero goes out and slays a dragon by himself. I guess today we have to include women in that. And also kisses the princess awake, that kind of thing, brings warrior to battle. But what we're being called to do right now is get our collective act together. And that has to include all the voices and all the perspectives that's already arisen in the room. So we're living inside that human story, and the plot has thickened, as Dr. Dunbar just illuminated for us. What we need is being strategic, being collaborative, and thinking about influence and impact and how those relate to each other. So strategic has the roots of to spread and leader in that word. So imagine that part of what we're doing when we're being strategic is we're spreading leadership. We're finding leaders wherever they are in our system. And the roots of collaborative are to work with, or literally co-labor, to work with. And influence comes from a flowing in, which is a nice thing to think about when we're considering water. And then the impact is about having a forceful effect. I think that's what we all want. If we're going to have our collective act together, we need strategic, collaborative influence and impact. And there's a term for that in the field I come from. I am the Chief Culture Officer at Arizona State University. And I also have been doing large-scale change work for a very long time. And we call this large-scale strategic collaboration. And in this little diagram, you might be able to see that it starts with a couple of people in conversation, having conversations that matter. And I'm going to give you an opportunity for that later in the talk. And then it builds into small groups who start to have some perspectives that are coming together of different ideas. But the real impact is when those small groups and multiple groups create networks and have influence across large systems. My belief is that attraction is much more strong than resistance. And I was trying to get these guys to come over to me. This was in Madagascar. These are lemurs, if you don't happen to know the Disney version of it. And what I decided to do eventually was just stand there and be very still. And they became curious and they started coming over to me and obviously mingling with me. So there is a flow of change that we're headed towards. So we want to attract change. And it really starts with when we come together initially with an inquiry or several inquiries. And then that takes us to looking for divergent points of view. And there are many, many ways to do that. It is very important that we collect all the divergent points of view before we say this is what's true. Then something starts to emerge in that process. That's really important to take a look at. That's really important to begin noticing. You can't predict it. Well, maybe you can predict 2 years into the future if we have the right people, but you normally can't predict what's going to emerge. You have to be responsive to what's emerging. And then coming back together with all of those new insights, with all of the responses to the inquiry, with the themes that have come together, with what you sort of know collectively, that's called convergence. So we do need to begin the journey together. And in the beginning, if we can set the stage right, the waters are relatively calm. We are connecting with each other. We're beginning to learn about each other. We have goodwill towards each other. When we begin to go out into the divergent stage, then we are looking for all those different streams of consciousness. Like, what is it that you know and you know and you know from your own expertise, but also from your own lived experience? And then that emergence I was talking about, like a spring that comes right out of the mountain. I'm a hiker, and one of the most astounding things I've ever seen was in the western part of the Grand Canyon, where there is a river that springs right out of the rock at the top and becomes this pretty big river that goes all the way down to the Colorado. And then when we come back together in convergence, by the way, this is when there are a lot of rapids usually, when you're in the divergent stage. This is when it gets exciting and like kind of sacred and amazing. And this is when we come back together and have to do the hard work of deciding together, what is it we learned? What is it we know? And then what is it we're going to do? So I just wanted to share that I've had the privilege of working around the world and being able to do this kind of collaborative strategic change with a bunch of different groups. So this is the Girl Scout National Convention. Any of you in here Girl Scouts? See, there's always some Girl Scouts. And this gathering as a whole brought together 14,000 Girl Scout volunteers and girls. And this event was called an open space, where the Girl Scouts were trying to figure out what the new organizational structure was going to be so that they could serve every girl everywhere. And this is a process where everybody creates the agenda on the spot based on what they want to talk about. And then we have that convergence at the end. I did that work in Madagascar with a mining company. They told me that everything we were teaching them, they actually already knew, but they had been told, they referred to them as the developers. They had been told by the colonists and the developers there that what they knew was wrong or inconsequential. Working in Latin America with a bunch of wonderful women who were trying to change the world through their practices with their children. In Singapore for the facilitators that were learning these large-scale methodologies. We had a big conference, that's when I was talking about where I didn't think I'd ever do a conference again, where we brought together change agents from all over the world. I did some work on the Gila River Indian community in their Department of Environmental Quality, and that's the steering group for that. We still have on the books SB 1070 in Arizona, which is basically an anti-immigration profiling law. And so we brought together people from across the community with very divergent perspectives. At that time, we had some Tea Partiers. They were still kind of the name they were giving to themselves, to have a community conversation on immigration. There's a national organization called the National Conference of Dialogue and Deliberation. They work together. And Open Space on Open Space in San Francisco, working with Israel Change Consultants, the US Merchant Marine Academy, where we had a big summit at the end of our time with them, and they decided on their strategy together with industry partners and midshipmen and all the alumni, parents, all the people that needed to be involved. And then this is an event I recently did at Arizona State University, where it is, these are technologists who are thinking about what they're going to do in the next year. So how do these groups do this? So my belief is that it starts with presence, personal presence. So I'm going to do a little experiment with you and see how this goes. I have a bell. I'm going to ring the bell, and I invite you to do whatever you do to get in touch with what's going on inside of you, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And for some of you, you'll want to close your eyes. Others, just find a spot, let your eyes rest. And the experiment here is, can you, in less than a minute, become present? Fully present, right here, right now. That was 30 seconds. So what did you notice? Call it out. What did you notice by just being still for 30 seconds? Your heart. It's cold. It's cold. Breath. One more, yes.
My mind was racing.
Your mind was racing. Great observation. That tends to be the case for us more of the time than we would like. Thank you for joining in that experiment. The second piece that groups can do when 2 or more people are fully present, there's a kind of connection that happens that's different than the connection that we often experience when we're coming from the very top of our front brain. And when that connection occurs, and so imagine 2 people, 4 people, thousands of people, then an opening occurs. Something can come in to the field, into our consciousness, into our awareness together, and we can begin to articulate what's emerging. So I'm going to invite you into a connection moment. If you'll stand up real quickly, find a partner. And other people are quieter and think before they speak. And we want to make it really possible for both of those styles to interact. There are also people that are kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I'm a bit like that myself. And so the opening that we want here is for us to pay attention to what we do know and for us to create the curiosity, the collective curiosity for what we don't already know. It is my belief that if we start by noticing what's working, it's antithetical to our Western way of doing things, really. We look at Arizona State, when I first got there, the hardest thing for me was I would talk about something, they'd say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? That's where they always would start. There are indeed problems, but if we can figure out what the opportunities are within that problem, what is it we do want, rather than what we don't want, all the bad news, we have a chance to build a foundation on what's really most precious to us, what we already value. So I'm going to invite you into another little experience. If you would find another partner, a neighbor, and since there's some of you that are just threes, that's just fine. This is an opportunity to tell a 3-minute story to each other. This is like an interview, okay? A good interviewer doesn't talk about themselves, by the way. So just to ask your partner this question: remember a time when you sense that you were in the right moment with the right people to collaboratively create real change. And sometimes it takes a minute, especially those think fully before you speak people. So give it a minute. And then if that person is not finding a story, you might ask them, what steps did you take? What was going on in that situation? And you have about 3 minutes each. So turn to your partner. I'm going to time it. I'll let you know when the time is up, and then I'll ask for what that was like and what you got out of that. So as you know, we have people online, and for that reason, we're really gonna try, I'm just gonna take a few, pop up and tell your story here, not your story. Tell, what did you get? What's a highlight? What stood out for you in that interaction? And we've got a couple of people that are gonna run the mics. So if you wouldn't mind waiting, then the people online can hear you. So what stood out for you? What surprised you? What resonated for you? That's the question. There's one back
I think the concept of experiencing reciprocity and exchange, sort of communal energy was something that really stand out from what James said, but also resonated with my experience of when the magic is happening. We're not just
Yes.
overwhelmed.
That's right. That's when the magic does happen. Reciprocity, community, nice. Over here.
My name is Angelina, and one of the common themes of our stories was approaching things from a non-adversarial approach. Seeing the gifts and the light that everyone can offer to a project or a challenge.
Beautiful. The gifts of the light. Who else? What stood out? Here, we've got one up here.
I think what we talked about were kind of mediation contexts. And what seemed to work was to have a third party target. In the case of contesting marital issues, have the children. In the case of engineering, have a document that people could beat up on the third object.
Okey doke, I'm not sure I'm cool with beating up on the children. Thank you. Good pattern though, good thing to be aware of. One more. There's one back there. Thank you, Norm.
Hi, my name is Betsy Bainbridge, and the common thread for both of our stories is that they were from when we were much younger and more optimistic.
The optimism of you. Well, I wish you all well. I think you're at the beginning of something critical. And I'm very impressed by the diversity in this room in terms of age. And I'm looking forward to the next time I see you all, there being a lot more diversity in all kinds of other ways. Take good care. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I think I'm up next. As the having the honor of the keynote this morning and also the good fortune of the sequencing of the presenters, I think will align nicely. So my name is Hannah Risley White. I am the newish director of the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, which is a great honor. I'm also here today with an incredible planning team from Interstate Stream Commission. I was hoping the team could stand up. Andrew, Amanda, Sarah is in the back of the room. Here's our planning team. And I also have the great honor of working with an incredible group of colleagues at the Office of the State Engineer. It's a great pleasure working with State Engineer Mike Hammond, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. But I see a number of folks from our team at Office of the State Engineer and Interstate Stream Commission here as well. Maybe you guys could raise your hands. John, yes, awesome. So a bunch of us here. It's also amazing to see so many familiar faces here from other state agencies, New Mexico Environment Department, Department of Ag. One of the themes in my presentation this morning is going to be partnerships. One of the things that I bring to this job specifically is the true belief that we cannot tackle the challenges ahead without partnerships. And so I have the great privilege of working with some really amazing people at state agencies and also federal agencies. I see folks from Reclamation, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service here, so incredible group of people. It's also very exciting to have this event sold out. What a great sign in terms of the commitment and interest to work towards addressing the challenges ahead. Before I jump in, I'm also just a little bit curious. There was some conversation earlier about, you know, the age range in the room. Hi, it's so good to see you too. So many great colleagues here. How many people here, is this your first water dialogue meeting ever? Wow, that's incredible. How many people have been to 5 or more water dialogue meetings? How many people here have been to 10 or more water dialogue meetings? All right, so it's really awesome to see this bridging of folks who've been engaged in this issue for a very long time and lots of new faces. That's fantastic. I also want to start by just thanking the Water Dialogue for dedicating this meeting in large part to water planning. And for Water Dialogue's many years of bringing people together to address water-related issues. As I think those of you who participated in previous years, the past 2 Water Dialogue annual meetings were dedicated to planning the state's planning efforts in the 50-year plan. And I'm going to provide a little bit more info on that later in the presentation. Okay, so given what we just heard from Nelia, and given the comments from Christine Whitney Sanchez, what I'm going to talk to you all about today is the Water Security Planning Act. And it's something that I personally am very excited about. And my job here today is to get you guys really excited about it too, and motivated and inspired to engage in this effort. So the Water Security Planning Act was passed in last year's legislative session. It passed unanimously. It is essentially a rewrite of New Mexico's regional water planning statute. And what it provides for us, particularly in the next year to 2, is a unique opportunity for everyone in this room, and hopefully a whole heck of a lot more people, to engage in what the future of regional water planning will look like in New Mexico. Over the next 2 years, Interstate Stream Commission, or really year and a half, is going to be developing rules and guidelines under the act that will determine how we as New Mexicans plan around water in New Mexico, potentially for decades to come. So it feels like an incredibly important window in time for us all to engage in this very critical effort. Before I talk more about the act, I think it's helpful to just provide a little bit of context. And so I wanted to speak more broadly about Interstate Stream Commission and our planning activities in general. So Interstate Stream Commission, I have the great honor of working for a governor-appointed commission. It's a 9-member commission. I see a couple of our commissioners here today. Great to see you all. I, as director, get this awesome job of kind of bridging staff and this commission. Interstate Stream Commission is distinct from Office of the State Engineer in that we are not a regulator, but we work very closely with our partners at Office of the State Engineer that administer water rights in New Mexico, and work with our colleagues at Environment Department who help protect water quality in New Mexico. Part of what Interstate Stream Commission does, our main really mission, is to support New Mexico in complying with our interstate compacts, which will become increasingly important as we face increasing water scarcity. We also do a lot of work around compliance with federal environmental regulations, including the Endangered Species Act. And very importantly, we are tasked by statute with leading New Mexico's water planning efforts. And those fall into 2 main buckets. So regional water planning The original statute was passed in 1987. That statute was replaced, as I just said, with the Water Security Planning Act last year. The Water Security Planning Act was a recommendation of the Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force, which I think you all are familiar with. If you haven't looked at their report, I highly recommend you check it out. It's available online. It was a task force convened by State Engineer Mike Hammond in 2022. I see quite a few task force members here as well. The task force was made up of 20 citizen representatives of all different water use sectors, 9 agency reps from all of the different state agencies that work on water, and then we also had 9 legislative advisors who participated in that process. And they came up with kind of an amazing slate of 17 recommendations, one of which was to pass this act to entirely re-envision regional water planning for New Mexico. The other bucket of planning work that we do at Interstate Stream Commission is state water planning. That's dictated by the 2003 State Water Plan Act. And so that's looking more broadly across the state as a whole. This past year, 2023, by statute, we're required to produce either an update or a review of the state water plan, and we did that. You will be seeing that shortly. We opted last year because of so many things going on to really do a review. So we looked at the past update to the plan from 2018 in light of the report that Nelia discussed earlier, so the climate change report, and then look towards the future in terms of what's needed. So you'll be seeing that shortly. I also want to just say, I think our planning team right now has an amazing vision for our planning program, with the idea that our program could really be an information hub where information is shared from various groups, and that we really see planning as an ongoing process. Historically, often there's been an effort at the state to sort of mount up for a big planning effort and then not do a lot for many years or decades. We think planning will be most effective if it is an ongoing process and there is continued and concerted effort, both from the state level and the local level. We also, again, don't see planning as being successful without really robust partnerships. So that clearly I will keep hitting on throughout this presentation. In terms of the context related to regional water planning, again, the original statute passed in 1987. The 16 currently existing planning regions kind of formed somewhat haphazardly as groups sort of self-organized. Those delineations of those regions are currently a combination of administrative and hydrologic boundaries, so a little bit of a hybrid. There are also a lot of regions. The state, since that act passed, completed 2 full rounds of regional plans for each of those regions. The first round was very much sort of self-determined. So the stakeholders within those regions kind of self-organized. They received some funding from the state to develop their plans. All of those plans look really different. But there was a lot of local engagement. There was a lot of local commitment in that first round of plans. The second round of plans in part was driven by the state, much more state-driven, with the idea of trying to have the plans be more consistent so that they could be integrated into a state plan. The first round of plans, like the plans were just kind of apples to oranges, like there wasn't any way to compare them or integrate them. And so that made it challenging from the state level to use those plans to say, here's the status of water issues in New Mexico. So that second round was very much sort of top-down driven. All 16 regions were updated in 2 years, in 2016 and 17, so as to roll those plans into the 2018 State Water Plan update. In talking to people who've been involved in both of those previous rounds of planning, I think the biggest thing that stands out for me is the challenges that everyone experienced in implementing those plans. So as we're looking towards the work ahead under Water Security Planning Act, a thing that's front and center in my mind, and hopefully some of yours, is how do we make sure that we're linking the planning process to implementation? And part of the challenge in the past was just funding. Some of the challenge was whose role is it to implement? who takes the lead in implementing those plans. So those are considerations. Okay. I'm not going to cover this really in much detail because Nelia did, but I think a big part of the context of this moment in time is precisely the work that Nelia outlined this morning. So, you know, climate change feels very real in this moment in time. We see that the temperatures are already increasing, and we know they are projected to increase throughout the state. I think what's really remarkable to me about this figure is simply that it's going to be hotter everywhere. So very significant. And then this figure, which I don't think Nelia included in her presentation this morning, I'm showing just because it highlights to me in a way that New Mexico feels like it's kind of in the bullseye of increasing water stress, right? So this is all kind of frightening. Although I do have to say, Nelia, you didn't make this comment earlier, but it's stuck. It's stuck. So one of the other things I'm going to do in this presentation is just weave in a bunch of things from my amazing colleagues that I get to work with that sort of stick in my mind. And one of those is a comment from Nelia about this looks terrible. It's frightening and concerning, and maybe why there's so many people here today. But also, Nelia made the point recently, would you rather be in a situation where you have to be super creative about how you use a small amount of water or deal with excess? And in some ways, flooding, terrible flooding that you can't stop might be worse. So I don't know if this helps anyone feel a tiny bit better. But there's upsides and downsides to either, right? And so I think the challenge for us in looking at this map is how do we get really creative about the using less? And I think humans are incredibly creative and resourceful when we put our minds to it. So let's see if we can figure this out. All right, so is this, I keep asking myself, is this a magic moment? And magic moment, so one of my many mentors in stepping into this work in New Mexico said to me sort of early on that sometimes like once in a decade or maybe once in a career, there is a particular moment in time where the convergence of a number of factors lay the groundwork for amazing things to happen that affect things for decades to come. And I can't help but feel like the Water Security Planning Act, amongst other things, feels a little bit like one of those moments. The urgency of climate change, to me, really hit home in 2022 with the largest and most unprecedented forest fires in New Mexico. And the prolonged drought and the impacts of drought across the state. It really felt like we weren't now talking about something in the future, but something very much that we are all experiencing right now. And I think in part of the conversation that Christine encouraged us to have about like what lays the groundwork for collaboration, one of those things sometimes is crisis, right? So we're feeling that. Number two, we have this incredible leap ahead report for the climate change in New Mexico report that Nelia reported on. Again, if you haven't read this, I highly recommend you do. It's available online. So that's part of the convergence of factors. We have the Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force report. And then we have, at this moment in time.
Would you hold up the books in front of the webcam?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Right here.
Right there.
Am I too close to the
You're
camera?
not, you're good.
Okay, good. Like someone is getting a view, up close view of my chin here. So these documents, highly recommend folks check those out. And then we also are really fortunate at this moment in time because we have real commitment and leadership from our decision makers to support sound water resources management. And that comes from both the legislature and our governor. So our governor is very committed, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, to supporting work at Office of the State Engineer Interstate Stream Commission related to water, but also at other agencies, New Mexico Environment Department, Energy, Minerals and Natural Resources, New Mexico Department of Ag, Indian Affairs Department. Last year's budget landed for us anyway at Interstate Stream Commission with more money for water stuff than we've ever seen before, sort of like order of magnitude more money for those efforts. This year, in the governor's executive recommendation, which came out last week, again, significant funding for both additional staff. Her recommendation includes 27 additional full-time employees for Interstate Stream Commission and Office of the State Engineer. And also significant funding for Indian water rights settlements, adjudications, water conservation efforts, acequias. So real support from our leadership. And then hopefully, and here's I'll give a little update on 50-year water plan. We're still working with the Gov's office on getting this plan out. The plan itself, I think, is designed specifically to tackle the challenges of climate change and the situation that Nelia so artfully articulated earlier. It will include recommendations to expand water conservation in all sectors, to develop new water supplies, and to protect and improve our water quality and our watershed health. So stay tuned. Hopefully that's part of this magic moment. And then we also have unprecedented federal and state funding available for these efforts. And then now we have this act. So to me, that feels like this magic moment that my mentor shared with me that might be possible. So how do we seize upon that? What's in the act? Well, first of all, I encourage you all to read it. It's in your packet for this meeting today. Again, it tasks Interstate Stream Commission with developing rules and guidelines. We are mounting up right now, and we've spent the last year preparing with contractors to mount up for large public engagement efforts in 2024. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on that because Andrew Erdman and the subsequent panel is going to talk about that a little bit more. But we're very excited for you guys to engage in that. This slide includes some of the sort of high level items that are included in the act, including ensuring and making sure that the state has a role in ensuring scientific integrity of the plan. So how do we at the state level make sure that the planning process is supported by the best available science data and models? That's going to require a real commitment to truly implementing the Water Data Act. And maybe Stacy will talk about that in her comments. How does this planning work build on existing planning? So the act is not intended to replace other planning efforts, but acknowledge that different entities throughout the state are doing extensive planning already. How do we bring that planning to the table to integrate into new regional water planning? That will, acknowledge existing state water law and protect existing water rights. Link to implementation. So how do we really, through this act, more strongly requires us to link planning to implementation, including Interstate Stream Commission will be required under the act to report to the legislature annually progress on the planning process, but also the priorities. It will require regions to prioritize projects. How are we, making those recommendations to the legislature for funding? And certainly we're intending to have robust public engagement sort of every step of the way. We do not believe that this will be successful unless there's buy-in from communities across the state, which is why we were very much committed to doing these rules and guidelines with a tremendous amount of public input. And I didn't say this earlier, I probably should have. The act requires us to revisit the delineation of the regions themselves. So we are going to be re-envisioning the whole thing and excited to do that with you all. I think it's also important to note on this slide that this, we're super focused on the rules and guidelines coming in the year ahead, but we also acknowledge that many parallel efforts are going to be important. There are areas of the state in which planning needs to be happening now, or more planning needs to be happening now to address the crises that we're facing. We also have been doing a lot of thinking in my shop about how to, in parallel to the rulemaking and guidelines development, really tee up the best available science data and models. And I'm pleased to mention that Dr. Phil King has come on recently as a senior technical advisor to the state for groundwater planning. We're excited to have him in that role and supporting this effort as another outgrowth of the task force. Okay, so what is our vision? It seemed like it might be great for you all to hear from us about what the state's vision is long-term related to this act. And I guess, you know, what makes me really excited about this is it has this potential, as I mentioned earlier, to provide a framework for ongoing and effective regional water planning. And again, with an emphasis of ongoing planning as process, not as product, but something that would be sustained and continued over time. And also, I'm gonna just say, because I had this awesome conversation at my table, thanks to Christine's prompting, that ongoing process also needs to be really thoughtful about how it's folding in new voices and new people. And it's not just the same folks who've been thinking about this for decades, but how do we create a process by which we're really engaging new voices and newcomers and young people. So let's all be thinking about that. Ultimately, you know, our hope is that this act will empower communities to come up with substantive solutions to the crises that we're facing. I think in the absence of planning, given the increasing scarcity that Nelia talked about, we will land in protracted and costly litigation and conflict. And I think there is much more benefit for all of us if we can work together and figure out how we're going to share increasingly scarce water supplies. And I think that totally has to come from the community level to be effective. There has to be real buy-in and engagement from the people involved for that to be successful. Hopefully this new planning effort can also think through how to integrate regional planning with state planning and have a continual and ongoing process that both are tracking on and successfully communicating with each other. And then also, as I've mentioned several times, how do we link the planning to implementation, including funding in particular? How are we ensuring that we're leveraging funding for the recommendations coming from the regions? And so in light of this being water dialogue and a presentation about planning, I'm also gonna ask you guys to engage a little bit. On each of your tables, there are some little yellow slips of paper. I like thinking about how do you create as many pathways for input as possible. So I'm also going to plug the website and give you our emails, but in addition, there's some little slips of paper. And I wanted to just pose these questions to you all that are at the bottom of the slide here. What do you hope this act will achieve? And how do we get there together? You can answer either question or something else. But we want to hear from you. So take a minute and write your thoughts down on these little slips of yellow paper. In the back corner of the room, above the coat rack, or there's Sarah. Sarah is wearing a yellow sweater. You can give the yellow slips to Sarah. Or above the coat rack, there's a box that says inbox. That is our inbox for the day. Feel free to give your slip to Sarah or drop them in the inbox in the back. We're here to have dialogue, so we wanted to hear from you. Okay, and I guess let me watch my time a little bit here. Whew, I'm almost out. I'll be quick here. Okay, so I think I'm gonna sort of go quickly through the immediate next steps, because as I said, Andrew's gonna cover this in a minute. But I think one of the critical things that I wanted to flag on this slide in particular is that we actually are working currently with Lori Uyaki, who during our 50-year planning process, she helped us convene a tribal water work group to inform the 50-year plan. They produced an amazing document, which is also going to be released in parallel to the 50-year plan. We have her on contract with us because the Water Security Planning Act calls for Interstate Stream Commission to coordinate with Indian Affairs Department in forming a tribal water advisory council. We're not sure that's what it's going to be called long term, but basically a group that would include tribal leadership from across the state to help engage in the regional planning process. And that piece feels particularly critical and was worth flagging here. Okay, so I think I'm gonna let Andrew cover some of this sort of like immediate next steps for this year. I did want to flag for everyone that we have been working with a communications firm. Again, I'm so excited there's so many people here. And also there's a lot more people who aren't necessarily thinking and caring about water that we need to figure out how to engage with. And so we're working with a communications firm. They put together this really beautiful website specifically for our work in implementing this act. It is mainstreamnm.org. Encourage you to check it out. There's a survey up now. It's going to be updated regularly with new content, including about the big public meetings that we're going to be holding across the state later this year. So please take a look at that. Oh, mainstreamnm.org. So the campaign, you'll notice all of my slides have this nifty logo, Mainstream New Mexico. So that's the campaign name for our implementation of Water Security Planning Act. And the website is mainstreamnm.org. All right, so I think in thinking about today's event and the previous presentations, it felt important to sort of talk about what's the action that's needed. So given all of this, what do we do? And so I tried to capture some thoughts on this slide. I'm sure this is not comprehensive, but there's lots to learn, right? I think one of the things I recognize in this job is I fully feel the more I learn, the more I realize I have to learn. So there's a lot to learn. And in particular for us all to really learn about our own water supplies that we depend on. But really importantly, and maybe this ties to Christine's presentation, there is an urgent need to learn about the other interests in our communities. Who are the other water users? What's important to them? The work of, Andrew's always reminding us that the work of the rules and guidelines feels daunting, but the real work comes after that, where we're actually planning with our communities about how to confront scarcity. And so we will be better suited for that work if we're understanding and working to understand our community's needs now. And then engage. Obviously, we're looking to all of you all to participate in the public engagement efforts we have coming this year in implementing the act and gathering input as to the delineation of the regional boundaries, how the entities would work, what the planning process and cycle would be. I also, again, encourage you to check out those two documents I mentioned, the task force report and the climate change impacts to New Mexico from New Mexico Tech, which actually just won a national award, the Fry Award, want to acknowledge that. And then looking to you all to motivate and lead, like how do we engage a broader audience? So another question, if you want to write something on another yellow slip of paper, is how do we engage a broader audience? How do we connect the science with everyday people and have it be meaningful to them in a way where they want to show up? Yeah, we're looking to help promote these outreach events. I think in closing, I wanted to, there's a couple of comments from colleagues that are here today that have stuck with me that I just want to share. If I can just take few minutes more. Okay, sweet. One of them is from Adrian Oglesby, who's in the back corner. It was a couple of years ago, we were at something, Adrian, and you said, let's take a minute to just acknowledge sort of the emotional, psychological toll of what we're facing. And you know, when Christine had us go inside a minute earlier, like I realized that Nelia's presentation makes me scared. I also, you know, this work is a huge part of who I am. I'm also a mom. I go home to a beautiful little 4-year-old. And this work feels daunting. Right? So I just want to thank you, Adrian, for that, because I come back to it regularly, like, oh yeah, let's keep in mind, this is hard stuff to confront. The other thing that I wanted to say is I feel like we learned something coming out of COVID, or at least I did. I feel like COVID really made me realize what a social species we are. Humans don't do well in isolation. And I think we had a conversation yesterday with Christina and Norm and the state engineer, in which the state engineer said something about people being hungry to connect, hungry for community. And I think the way that we confront the scary stuff in Nelia's presentation is by getting to figuring out and understanding the bigger we. So who is the bigger we? I think that's the other question for all of us and part of the homework here about understanding your community's needs. How do we honor and support our rich agricultural traditions in New Mexico as we confront what's ahead? How do we learn from some of the shortage sharing that the acequias can teach us? How do we fully acknowledge and respect tribal sovereignty in New Mexico? How do we build on the existing sovereign to sovereign relationships, but make those stronger? And how do we bring the traditional ecological knowledge that the gentleman in the back raised? How do we bring that to bear and respect that in how we're confronting these challenges? And then also importantly, how do we steward our landscape? We have incredible and precious ecosystems in New Mexico that are also going to be weathering these changes. And so what's our role? What's the we in all of that? And so I think I'm out of time. I'm just going to say I'm very excited to work with all of you. All of our planning shops names and emails are on this slide. And we're very much excited to engage with you all in implementing this act, which will have an impact on how planning happens in New Mexico for decades to come. And thanks so much.
Break, I think we're a little over. So maybe we'll split the difference a little bit, be back from break at 10:35. And also for the afternoon session, we're gonna need some volunteers for hosts at each table. So we want one host for 4 people. So we'll just kind of say 2 per table. So if you want to volunteer to be a host, come see me. I've got cards for you. You know, volunteer eventually becomes voluntold, but anyway. Yeah, we'll see when we come back. Thank you. Heard scientists. Yeah, scientists. Let's just start. Yeah. All right, we're gonna be beginning our panel. Talking about the Water Security Act and how planning is gonna be different this time. Panelists include Lauren Gom, Stacy Timmons, Andrew Erdman, Max Angel, Phoebe Sweeney. Holly Garcia couldn't make it, it's my understanding. Yes? I know, but I'm just gonna roll on, rolling on. Take your seats, please.
That was more forceful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take your seats. Thank you over there. Appreciate that. All right. There we go. That's good. All right. We are rolling into our panel here. Should be pretty good. Each panelist will talk for about 7 minutes, and there will be time for some questions after. If you all want to introduce yourselves at the start, have at it. And Norm Gom will be the first panelist speaking. Thanks.
It's so great to see everybody here today and to see all the energy in the room and to see people talking and so engaged that they won't sit down and listen. But this is for both, and both of those are absolutely essential going forward. The panel is selected to give you a short burst of information from various perspectives of people who are engaged in the water issues in New Mexico about why planning this time will be different. And I have 6 reasons to tell you about in my short remarks. Number 1, previously, regional water plans were prepared. They were submitted to the ISC. The statute said nothing about what the plans were, the purpose was to show that New Mexico had a use for all the water that it has in order to have backstop to keep Texas from coming in inappropriate. I mean, that was the purpose. But many regional planners took it much further than that. But then what happened? They didn't have much guidance. They produced a bunch of plans, but what really was one of the what is a market change is previously plans were submitted to the ISC for acceptance and filing. And I know they were not really reviewed as a step along the way. They were accepted as they were for filing. You know, the presentations of the water planners to the ISC was cursory. The discussion was cursory, and they were accepted for filing. This time, the Interstate Stream Commission is going to be engaged continuously. There should be no surprises as to what is expected. The rules are all there, both in statute and forthcoming rules and guidelines. But the important point is the plans will be approved following a rigorous review. And an approved plan is an endorsement for implementation of the priorities laid out in that plan. Second, the act calls for transparent collaboration leading to implementation. The word collaboration appears in the act twice. To be approved for implementation, each entity has to reach a consensus through collaboration. There can be no minority reports. The plans must be substantive and they must be agreed. And the only path forward to get there is the engagement and collaboration and process that Christine Whitney Sanchez presented earlier. Shared values. Effective collaboration. Leading to consensus. First requires us to think about, talk about, understand, connect, to determine our shared values. The act requires each region, in the language of the act, to define the public welfare of the region. Now, in English, that means shared values. We have such diverse interests, but we also have tremendous shared values. We need to find those and articulate them, and the act requires that we do that. Water across New Mexico is a community problem. Community problems require community-driven solutions. There is no other way. The act requires consensus and prioritization across the region of community-driven solutions. This one, next one, is something that I have stood for my entire career as a water professional in New Mexico. It is scientific integrity. Those words appear in the act along with an excellent definition. And I want to read you now the language in the act. The commission shall ensure, by using the integrated water data and information platform developed pursuant to the Water Data Act, and collaborating with Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources of the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology and the Water Resources Research Institute, that the best data and models related to water resource planning are available to the regional water planning entities and are used with scientific integrity and adherence to the principles of honesty, objectivity, transparency, and professionalism in developing, vetting, and prioritizing proposals. That is statutory language in New Mexico. Finally, we have to prioritize. The acts, before we drafted the bill, before the bill was drafted, numerous legislators told the people who were engaged in this effort what they had to have. And one of them is they have no clue at the top, when they get all of these random requests for capital outlay, how to prioritize them. It's usually the squeaky wheel gets the dollars. Instead, we need to collaborate. And we need to prioritize across the regions the programs, policies, and projects that the legislature will then, the ISC must, according to the act, prioritize those for advocacy for implementation. The legislature will make the decisions and they will know what your priorities are. And it's not just your, it's the other 2 million New Mexicans. Thank you.
Norm, I've got a question.
I think we don't have time on the panel, James. I'm sorry, but we have 7 minutes each, and we want you to hear from everybody today, please.
There should be time at the end after all the panel goes through, about 30 minutes for questions.
Good morning, I'm Stacy Timmons, and I'm here from the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources, which is a research and service division of New Mexico Tech. I'm the Associate Director of Hydrogeology Programs there, and one of our programs at the Bureau of Geology is the Water Data Initiative, which is a collaborative effort, a spinoff from the Water Data Act, which is what I'm going to talk to you about here today. Just as a reminder, there is little vignettes from each of us in the packet that was provided. And so there's a lot more background and content and perhaps website links that you can find in the text in the packet there. So the Water Data Act was legislation passed about 5 years ago now in 2019 that basically directs our state to do better with our water data, working on sharing our water data, integrating it, putting it together, and managing it better, working collaboratively, hence the Water Data Initiative, with regional efforts and national efforts, as well as 5 state agencies that are specifically named in this effort. So our agency, the Bureau of Geology, is simply the convener. We are asked to get everybody together. Let's work on water data. Let's put some standards together. Let's move in the same direction. The program manager for this is Rachel Hobbs, who's over there on a yellow top. I just want you to send her your comments on my talk and any data that you need to Rachel. We're working with the State Engineer's Office, the Interstate Stream Commission, the Environment Department, and Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources as directing agencies in the Water Data Act. The Water Data Act specifies a long list of specific water data that shall be made more available. It is very encompassing and kind of a huge effort to just go and grab a bunch of data. So you can look through the text that I provided or the legislation to look at the list of data that are included, or you can start by exploring what we have in a data catalog. So we have kind of 2 main efforts that I'll talk really quickly about. One is this data catalog where we are basically illuminating data sets that are currently available in New Mexico. Some of them are pointing you to websites where data exists. Some of them are actual data sets that are uploaded to this webpage. And some of them are going to be links to data visualization, map tools of that wide range of data sources. If you are a data collector or data provider, this is a place where you can also put your data for others to come and find and use. So this is a really important tool that addresses some of the needs of the Water Data Act. And I want to kind of shift to thinking about how water data and the Strategic Water Planning Act kind of fit together. When we think about, I don't know, the big opportunity that we have here, we have lots of really smart scientists. We have data, which I would classify as the raw data, the measurements, and then we have information. Information has been somewhat synthesized data. It's been interpreted, put together into a report or to a map. And then we have this other category of water policy and water management that is also really important for the Water Data Act and for the strategic water planning effort. And that place and overlap, I think, is that connection point that Hannah talked about, that we're really trying to kind of refine for the strategic water planning. And in terms of the water data, what I'm trying to get to and what I hope you'll help us gather here today is what are the key questions for some of these regions? What are the issues that you're facing and where do you need data to help get that together? And then from that, once we have the questions, we can then look to the data sources that we have available and the information that's available, and then try to integrate that for the regions, for whoever is working on these issues, and work towards improved water policy and management for those regions. But it does go back to what are the community's needs? So just as an example of how this can develop, I wanted to just bring you one quick use case. So identifying those questions is basically developing a use case. How are we going to use the data to answer a specific question? And so we had a question which was, where is New Mexico monitoring groundwater? How much do we have information on our groundwater levels? And how can we work to improve this? And so with a project that we had funded last year from Thornburg Foundation, we collected a whole bunch of groundwater level data that are electronically available online. You can find out more about the details of this effort from our website, which is newmexicowaterdata.org under the projects tab. And there's a report that describes a lot of the effort that went into that. One of the outputs is a data visualization, a map tool that looks something like this. If you find your way to our data viz page, you can see a bunch of colorful symbols on this map. Orange being places where we can see groundwater levels going down, blue being places where we can see groundwater levels going up, and an orange bar that's horizontal, meaning it's a steady groundwater level. And then you can click on those points and have a sense of, get a little graph of what the trend in the groundwater level is over a period of time. So this is a really important tool to just kind of, first off, explore what the data are available electronically in New Mexico on groundwater levels. And then also kind of think about the places where we need more data. So in our project, we identified 10 key regions that we wanted to dig deeper on and look for places where we need more monitoring. And so part of the output also on this map and in the report that's associated with it are some areas where we've identified a need for more groundwater monitoring. So hopefully in coming years, we can utilize this information and go and potentially drill wells that will be used for monitoring and tracking groundwater level changes, water quality changes as we face this future of less water available. One quick thing I wanted to mention, my 7 minutes, I think I'm at 6:50, is that we have a water data meeting coming up. So save the date of May 10th. It's a Friday coming up. We'll have it here in Albuquerque. If you go to our website, you can sign up for the newsletter and you'll get information straight to your inbox about that. That's all I have. Next up. Thank you. Do you have slides?
I don't.
I'll just make that.
I'm happy to hear about that. That's fine. Yeah.
I can laugh at this means.
Great. Okay. Thanks. Sorry, I was trying to keep it simple without slides. Apparently, it makes it a little bit harder. Yeah. So my name's Andrew Erdman. I'm the manager of the water planning program at the Interstate Stream Commission. I really feel pretty strongly that I should start with just having a huge thank you to all the people who are here and have an interest in this work. It's pretty amazing. I've had this job for 2 years, so this is certainly not my program that I've created. And it just seems like I've been coming to this. I was one of the people with my hands up for having been to more than 10 of these. We've asked that question, or I've seen it asked at previous events, and it seems like there's a lot more people here for the first time this year than has been the case in the past, and it's just really exciting. So thanks so much to everyone who's here and to the organizers of the event. It's great to see everybody. I'm going to give just a little bit of information about myself because I often feel like it's just unbelievable that I have this job, and how could anybody possibly understand enough about water to have this job? I'm not positive that I am that person. We're a very small team. I have a background in water resources, but there's certainly lots of things I don't know. So I went to the University of New Mexico's Water Resource and Planning program, worked for the Forest Service out of the Regional 3 office down on Broadway here in Albuquerque for a number of years. I worked at the state engineer in the adjudication and in water rights for a number of years, worked at the city of Santa Fe for about 8 years at their water department, and I've been here at the Interstate Stream Commission for a couple of years. It's a lot of water work. It's got a big blind spot relative to agriculture. I just want to be real clear about what I know about and what I don't. So that's who I am. I'm, I guess, in charge of, I feel like really just a member of our water planning team. There are 3 of us. I would ask them to stand up, but like many of the things I was going to present about, that's already been done. So there are 3 of us who are our water planning team. I'm really thankful for them. Everybody is here. That is our entire statewide water planning group. The fact that that group is so small, I think everybody on our team is great. Also, we really need help to get this addressed, right? As Norm pointed out, there's a couple million New Mexicans who didn't make it to the meeting, and we're all gonna do the best we can, right, to represent the interests and the needs and the values that belong to everybody, and to really try and get more people involved in doing all this water planning work. The most important piece of this, I think, and the reason that this is the first meeting I've been to where the word magic was used, and it's been used twice. So I think the reason that we have some magic relative to this particular moment is, as has been noted, because of the urgency of it, right? So all the work that Amelia presented, or Dr. Dunbar presented earlier today, is as anxiety inducing for me as I'm sure it is for many of you. And at the same time, it really seemed to be the reason that everybody is here. For the sake of reiterating this, because I really think it's important that we keep hammering home the issue, we're looking at a reduction in surface water of something like 5% a decade. That's 25% in the coming 50 years. That's a lot. It comes with a bunch of attendant additional kind of impacts, including changes in when we're expecting runoff, increases in aridification and aridity. We're worried about flood issues. There's all sorts of things that are concerns for the future that we're looking at for water management. And certainly I'd encourage everybody to go. We have it on our website, Mainstream in New Mexico, or mainstreamnm.org. That also is a place where you can go and look at the work that Dr. Dunbar and her team did to look at some of those. And I'd encourage you all to go there and look at that, maybe in small bites. So there's that urgency. We have this magical piece that seems like we have a tremendous amount of interest, not just at this level, but also at like the higher level of folks who are actually allocating funding towards a lot of our projects. I should also mention, I've merely been doing this for 15 years. The 15 years that I've been active in doing this, the mantra has mostly been, can we do more with less? And that seems to be something that we're also moving away from too, and into this can we do more with more kind of a mode. So that also perhaps is a contributor to the magic of the moment we're at right now, that there's really an opportunity. And I think that's going to be one of the things that provides the potential to really make state water planning different this time and in previous iterations. All right, so quickly, the thing I'm really supposed to be talking about is what the next steps are and what we're going to be doing next. So our team is responsible for implementation of the act. The first piece of that is going to be creating these rules and guidelines, and we're really going to use input and engagement with the public and people throughout New Mexico as the basis that we're going to use to build this. We really want to have a lot of buy-in for the process. As Hannah mentioned earlier, I guess paraphrasing me, it's going to be hard to do rules and guidelines, and that should be the easiest part of this process. So that's what we're going to be doing over the next year. Actually, year's about right, a little bit less than that. So we've been working with a firm to do a really nice website. We're going to use that to collect information to support the rules and guidelines. We're also going to be doing a series of public meetings. Those are going to be held in the 16 existing regions. Those were on the map that was up here earlier today. I realize that doesn't reflect the way the regions are likely to land, but it's what we've got. We certainly promised those when we left those regions back in 2017 at the close of the last round of regional planning. The public meetings are going to address, well, we're going to collect information that is going to be used to create the rules and guidelines. Our real goal is to expand participation, really get a lot more buy-in, really have ongoing and effective regional planning, as Hannah mentioned, and I'd add to that really active and expanding, ongoing and expanding, so that we continue to bring more people into this, right? And that's what we're really hoping to kind of set the groundwork for doing with our rules and guidelines process. I should have looked to see if I was at 7 minutes, but I'm just going to say here, as I wrap up my comments here, the next piece that we have that I think this room can be particularly helpful with is going to be about using this website to really connect with people around New Mexico and make sure that the sense of magic is kind of conveyed, right? We're in a difficult moment. There's a lot of urgency. There's opportunities that haven't existed in the past. And we hear a lot from people who are trying to figure out what to do next. And one of the things we'd really like to highlight are stories from around New Mexico that can kind of humanize some of these statistics that have been shown on the screen today. And this is a group that I'm sure has some stories of resilience or of catastrophe or of ways around problems or problems that perhaps they didn't find a way around. And actually, if anybody is interested in reaching out to us, we would love to be able to highlight some of those stories to provide opportunities for other folks in the state to connect with each other through shared struggles and through shared successes. So yeah, please find me around here during the rest of the day if you have any interest. And of course, our information's up on our website, mainstreamnm.org. So thanks very much.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Max Hankels, and I'm a program manager for the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. and also was the agency designee on the Policy Infrastructure Task Force last year. You know, at NMDA, I'm not really going to speak for farmers. That's not really our role because they're more than capable of speaking for themselves and their perspectives on this. It's also obviously a very diverse group culturally, economically, geographically, in terms of their operations and practices. But I'm going to give a couple kind of general ideas about how regional planning can be both beneficial, both in involving and in supporting agricultural communities. So just kind of some importance of this round, and then I'll get into some specific provisions from the Act. So this new round of regional planning is going to really be crucial for ensuring that agricultural communities are viable and resilient in the face of increasing water scarcity and climate change. As is often noted, irrigated agriculture is the largest water user in the state and also holds the majority of the water rights in many basins. Yet farmers are also the most immediately and intimately affected by shortages and water uncertainty. Agricultural water use not only supports food production and farmer livelihoods, but also shapes the landscapes, ecosystem services, and cultural identities of the communities in our state. So I think it's really important that we understand the interaction both between water management and also land management to have this holistic perspective to regional water planning. So I think a central challenge really will be how can we preserve this agricultural heritage of our state while also conserving water and addressing the new water realities. So I'm going to really focus on 3 specific provisions that I thought are going to be really important in terms of involving agriculture in regional planning. And Norm already touched on most of them, but the first one really is the requirement to base planning on best science, data, and models. I think in fulfilling this, it's really important that ISC and the regional entities consider a long-term planning horizon to help farmers really understand what their water situation is in each basin. There's many types and sizes of farms I mentioned, but they all really have one thing in common. They need a reliable source of water. And the business decisions they make, you know, infrastructure, farm equipment, cropping patterns, et cetera, these are long-term investments. And the financing of them can be very complicated. So I think by advancing the science, our understanding, it can really inform them so that they can make these decisions for their long-term water solution, you know, including, you know, knowing the supply-demand imbalance in their basin and coordinating action during shortages to reduce their uncertainty. A second real key requirement that Norm touched on is that each plan include projects, programs, and policies prioritized for state funding. And I think the real purpose of this, you know, is to incentivize regional planning, create buy-in from stakeholders, and effectively allocate state resources to local needs. So for these projects to really support agricultural resilience, there's a couple considerations. First, I think farmers should play a leading role in crafting agricultural water conservation strategies. And there's really kind of 3 kind of reasons for that, but really only farmers, you know, I mean, planners can really understand it from the water perspective and, you know, and from the technical perspective, but they often don't understand the business realities and non-water considerations faced by farmers. You know, there's a whole suite of potential water conservation strategies, some of which are already being implemented in the state. You know, we have infrastructural improvements, irrigation practices, incentives for cropping changes, stormwater capture, soil health improvements, or voluntary rotational fallowing, just to name a few. But I think it's important to design these with farmer input from the start. That way there will be more adoption, will make sense with the economic decision-making processes of local producers. And they'll also consider the interrelated land management factors. To give a recent example with the water conservation program in the Lower Rio Grande, you know, the ISC held listening sessions and found out the concern with the fallowing program about erosion, loss of soil fertility, and weed infestations. And they were able to craft some flexibility in their program to allow a slight bit of surface water irrigation to cover crop. So I think there's some creative solutions there, but it needs to come from dialogue. And then finally, I think it's also important because farmers, it's important that they can see their conservation efforts in the context of the holistic vision for the basin. So they understand that it's part of a greater vision rather than just shifting their use to other sectors. Second, I think it's important that these programs and policies think beyond just water budgets. As the recent experience with fires and the SACAs have shown us, often agricultural water security is just as reliant on watershed management and on upstream risk mitigation and disaster recovery programs as on-farm conservation. And if you've ever been to an irrigation district meeting, you'll know there's a million different topics that come up besides just the water balance. So there's a whole range of issues that I think can be addressed. So finally, the last provision, real briefly, the Act also explicitly requires engagement with rural communities and SACA communities in ISC's implementation of the Act. And I think it's really important to involve these communities early and meaningfully to provide more opportunity for alignment of interests and solutions. The communities are very diverse, but it'll be important kind of to consider things such as agricultural calendars and schedules, which are often different than those of us that work normal business hours. Farmer focus events. If you only go to water conferences, you'll notice you don't see a lot of producers there. So you're going to have to go to the events they're attending. Existing community networks. So that's going to take a lot of direct outreach and relationship building. And then I think listening, sessions, community dialogue, that sort of thing. I think these are all important actions that ISC can embark on in the next year. So anyways, thank you for your time and happy to answer questions later.
Good morning, everybody. Goatsi Hopa. My name, I'm just gonna introduce myself. Goji Natsi Chanzina Nursata Deshpiatin Essa. Sonama Kokitimek or Sonama Kach Jamehin Osata. Gochats, I'm an ISC commissioner. My name is Phoebe Swina. So that's the hat I'll be wearing today, but always I can't leave how I was brought into this world and my name and my clan. So that's what I shared this morning with you all in my introduction. And just acknowledging everybody. And as Andrew said earlier, it's amazing to see so many people here today and engage from various fields and stakeholders and communities and different parts of New Mexico. One thing I wanted to just share in my learning, and my grandpa taught me, he lived into his mid-90s, to be a lifelong learner. And in this role as ISC commissioner, one of the ISC commissioners, I've learned so much in this role. And I just appreciate everybody here because I tried my best to use 2 ears and listen and absorb that information from various viewpoints. And I think that's what we need to continue to do, to what Christine talked about earlier, is that listening, that connection and engagement is so important. So I just wanted to start from that point. I know we're trying to talk about ways that, let me do a time check. Can somebody?
You're good.
Okay, tell me, pull me off when, when time's up. But I just wanted to say, the topic here about the Water Security Planning Act and it being different this time. And I think the way it will be different is from all of us. This is our opportunity, as Christine mentioned, how problems, how challenges can also be framed as an opportunity. This is our opportunity for everybody living today, for me living today. We only have our lifetime to make those positive impacts. And the work that we all do, sitting at these tables, collaborating, listening, and cooperating. And as I've been brought up, is to benefit everybody in the thought, the well-being of HOPA, which means everybody in our language. Everybody, everything, including the land, including all of the elements of that hydrological cycle that many nerds talk about and we live and think about every day. It's every single element of that hydrological cycle. From the hayash, from the mist, to the henati, to the clouds, to the kachata, kawata, to the snow and the rain, to then it becoming part of the ground, naya, to go under, zishpia, to be the streams and rivers that we all depend upon to be that water is life phrase. So we're part of that, and I like to say we're all walking bodies of water. Science has confirmed that, right? Science that we've been talking about has confirmed we're all walking parts of water. So we're part of that ecosystem, we're part of that hydrological cycle. And so it is about HOPA, it's about all of us, and I love water. I love water, to my bones and in my blood. And so in asking the question if it is different this time, it really is amongst all of us to make sure it will be different, that it won't be a document sitting on a shelf, that we can actually do things through this plan. And part of it is actually going through that process, which is the collaboration and engagement respectfully. And one thing I wanted to say in black and white, why it might be different and why I hope it is different, is because in this plan and this legislation, we have a section that actually identifies the engagement of tribal nations and pueblos here in New Mexico. 100+ years ago, I know in talking about, signing of the Rio Grande Commission, Rio Grande Compact and other water agreements, there was no tribal engagement. There was no tribal person sitting there. And so as we talk about water in New Mexico, I sure hope that we use this opportunity to have that engagement and that collaboration and inclusion and incorporation of that perspective. Because as we talk about water data, I was looking at all of those pictures and slides, which I know a lot of the data mined for those reports, those technical as identified by Dr. Dunbar is based upon the existing data that is available in black and white or from gauges. But I also want to share that there are other resources of existing data, and that's living data. That's living data in the minds and the language and the way of life of our indigenous communities, tribes, and pueblos here. And so that is hard. That is a little bit harder to capture and extract and put on paper. But that is why the engagement of tribal nations and pueblos is so important, because there's a lot of wisdom and expertise related to that data source. That is a must as we continue, as the gentleman in the back shared earlier, our indigenous peoples have been living in this landscape since time immemorial. We've had to carry the experience of that balance. And I always want to say with balance, you achieve it in a split second, the next second, you're out of balance potentially. It's an iterative process. You always have to work at it. So it's not a one and done thing. We have to all be engaged in it, and it is work. And that's okay. That's all right. And I'm so, again, happy to see everybody here willing to be involved in that iterative process and be involved in the work. And we just need to be transparent that it is going to be work and we're going to hit the speed bumps, but let's work on it together. And so with that, I'll turn it over. I'm sure I'm over my 7 minutes, but I appreciate everybody listening, and I look forward to this process as we go forward and continuing to learn and to listen to you all, as well as trying to advocate for the incorporation of the indigenous perspectives and the data sources that are within those perspectives. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Appreciate you all being here, and it's an honor to be here, a privilege. My name is Eric Olivas. I am the Vice Chair of the Bernalillo County Commission. I was just elected last year, November of 2022. And I'm also the Chairman of the Albuquerque Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority Board. I was born and raised here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but my roots here in New Mexico go back much, much further. My great-grandfather was a sheep herder in the Nacimiento Mountains up above Cuba. And if you don't know what that word means, nacimiento in Spanish is a word for miraculous birth. It's often taken in a religious context, but if you don't know that, it's also known as the San Pedro Wilderness. It's a place of springs, right? Water miraculously birthed to the surface of the earth, nourishing the environment there and nourishing life that has prospered in that region for many, many years, right? You think back to the indigenous peoples that were the original culture in that area, all the way up to, you know, my grandfather, who was a Spanish immigrant of many generations. So it's incredibly, it's a huge honor for me to be here today and be talking about water, which is something that I've been passionate about my entire life. Watching as our climate has changed, my generation is the generation that I believe has a real opportunity in partnership with everyone to solve some of these complex challenges that have been put on our table from decisions that have been made over many generations, decisions to dismiss indigenous culture, to dismiss the knowledge and the tools that we know in favor of other systems and other creations that we've made that in many cases I believe have put us in the position we're in. But we have a unique opportunity now to change that course. And we are confronted with this reality of climate change, but we also have to look at the past and how do we remedy the past? How do we use this opportunity, this planning process, and the opportunity to invest in the future to remedy some of those mistakes? And I can't help but think it's a little ironic. I was talking to one of my colleagues here that I'm the political representative here before you today of the largest commoditizer, I don't know if that's a word, of water in our state, right? The Albuquerque Water Utility Authority. We sell water to residents of the metropolitan area here. But it's incredibly important, I think, that in this planning process, we try to move away from that practice of seeing water as a commodity and rather seeing water as the life force, the connective tissue that it is within us, within our society, within our culture. And those decisions that were made in the early 1900s, 20th century, we now have the opportunity to make some changes. And I'm really hopeful about this process and the opportunity that we see before us here today, right? The place that we're in, the very place we're in, the Pueblo Cultural Center, and bringing together the diverse users from our acequias. We have the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, the Water Authority, our counties, our cities, our municipalities, our farmers, our scientists, right? We have the best minds and the best practices in the room right now. And this is an opportunity to build on that and grow on that through this planning process. And so I'm really hopeful about the future, and I'm really hopeful about what that engagement of this large and diverse group can mean for the future. And I want to say something sort of more specifically to the Middle Rio Grande region now. In my brief tenure here working with the county and the Water Authority, we do an amazing job at the authority and through our local jurisdictions here of working together, but largely in times of crisis, right? And the unfortunate reality we face is that every year is going to be another crisis. As we look at the realities that we started this conference with today, we know that the impacts of climate change are only going to increase. The heat is literally getting turned up. So we can no longer afford to just collaborate when there's a shortage in the river, in the system, because there will always be a shortage from here on out until we start looking at water differently, until we start looking at this again as that connective tissue of our society that binds us all together, that is interconnected. The farmers, the agricultural users are interconnected with the urban users, are interconnected with our tribes and pueblos and indigenous communities. And I think that this planning process presents that unique opportunity to really reframe our concept of water and reframe our concept of quote unquote beneficial use, right? We have ecosystems as well that are beneficial to our society, but it's impossible for us to quantitatively value those systems. And so this planning process, I'm very hopeful that with the group we have here before us today and the engagement of our entire state, we have a real unique opportunity again to shift that mindset and move to a place where we can really lead the nation and make our community proud of doing something really good. So I appreciate the opportunity to stand before you today and speak, and I'm really just honored to be part of this panel and these distinguished speakers. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone this morning. You're hanging in there. I know it's been a long morning, and let me just tell you from my perspective, it's hard to be last, okay? So I'm gonna do my very best though to keep you engaged, and I'm so honored to even have the opportunity to present to you today. My name is LaDonna Clayton, and I am the Executive Director of the Ogallala Land and Water Conservancy, but also a former Clovis City Commissioner. And that's important for me to mention because some of what I'm going to share really came out of that experience. So the title, as you can see, is Water Can't Wait. And this is about the Eastern New Mexico groundwater crisis. I only have 7 short minutes to talk about that. I do want to put a plug in for Jake McCook, who is really leading a charge for Water Can't Wait, because there it is, right? It cannot wait. And if nothing has resonated with you yet, I hope that what I'm going to say will. If you haven't looked beyond hope and decided you have the personal will to engage at this point, I hope you do not walk away from here today without determining that you have the personal will to become involved and engaged. As a water ambassador, and I'm not the only one, Norm Gom, there are other water ambassadors in this room. One of our key roles is to get the communities that we live and breathe in, the regions that are important to us, to engage immediately. So I cannot express that enough. I'm gonna see if I can't, thank you. I couldn't get it to go. I will try this. I still don't think it changed. We'll try this. I'll see if that works. No.
It's under your paper, pointers.
Oh, what, where to see it is under my papers? No, I don't think it's literally moving. Okay.
I'll reset.
There it is. Maybe it'll hang in there now.
Yeah, I think we're doing it.
Okay.
Right.
Sorry about that. I'm gonna set that right there. I want to read this quick quote, and I took it from the Water Advocates, Norm, which I've learned so much from, and I'm so pleased to be associated with in some degree. So it says, water planning is the process through which we potentially can equitably determine how best to minimize, mitigate, and potentially adapt to the pending water shortages projected for our state. Water issues affect every legislative district and every New Mexican, and there is broad acknowledgement that the state faces a groundwater challenge that requires urgent action. In eastern New Mexico, groundwater from the Ogallala Aquifer is the sole source of potable water, and it is finite and depleting rapidly. And it is for this reason that water can't wait for us in eastern New Mexico. So we're a really great example of what happens when planning doesn't happen and when planning does happen. And then what do we do with the knowledge that we gain in the execution process? We can't wait. We have a very urgent call to go ahead and execute everything we can to save what little groundwater we have left. And that's just the way it is in eastern New Mexico. So I'm Clovis, and 19 miles away from me is Portales. I was born and raised there. My family, many of them, several of them live there now, and friends I was born in, I was born in the same community and raised with, are going through a very serious struggle right now. So we can't wait for the rulemaking to take place, but the rules are very important. It's just that we have to move while they're being created. As I said, our aquifer in Clovis is the sole source of potable water, and it is finite. It only lasts so long. And we know that we looked at aquifer mapping. That's been brought up by Stacy. That's been highlighted as a very important piece of what we got to do to move forward in this challenge. And for us, it was the difference maker. We began to move because we received the results based in scientific data that had integrity, that informed us where we were. And the picture was super bleak, okay? So 2016, we had a water summit, and there was the first wave of the initial results that Dr. Jeff Rawling and Alex Reinhardt had began to put together, as well as Stacy Timmons' work. And it ignited us. It ignited us into action. So we use that data, and we are in motion in multiple ways. The affluent reuse system is one of the ways that we began to change the nature of what can we do. What is our water supply? What different sources do we have to supplement the only sole water supply of groundwater that is depleting at a very rapid rate? Affluent reuse was one of the answers. In Clovis, we're fully functional, saving 4 million gallons per day. But the Portales system has stalled. So you can almost take our two cities, Portales and Clovis, and I always speak with respect about Portales because that, again, is my hometown, but also my heart is heavy for them. What if they had planned? What if someone had said, have you done water planning? Have you considered taking a serious look at your hydrologic reality? Do you know where you stand? What are your sources of supply? Are you going to run out? Because they got the same data we did. We looked at the aquifer mapping results. It was Curry County and Roosevelt County. They saw what we saw, but when I looked at that data, I went, oh no, Portales is going to be in much dire circumstances than we are sooner. And so for those of you who may not know that about Portales, they are in stage 3 emergency water restrictions and have been since June of 2023. And it has been a difficult journey, and it's becoming more so. But what I know is there's a grassroots movement there, and I'm working with that little grassroots group who said we have to collaborate collectively. Our voices must rise. We have to be heard because they didn't look to the city leadership. They didn't really look to the state leadership yet, but they're looking now. They look to themselves for first, what do we do? And how do we get the attention of those who can help us most? How do we immediately take action to reverse or at least hold on to where we are? We're talking about not being able to take showers. I mean, I watched a New Mexico Christian children's home. Children couldn't have enough water to take a shower. And then there's the water to drink. How long before the water to drink is affected? Currently, yes, yards are not being watered. Plants are only being watered maybe 2 times a week. You couldn't wash your car. All those things are happening there, but what's next if we can't reverse this situation, if we can't step in and do something to make the difference? Yes, we're waiting for delivery of the surface water from the Ute Reservoir by 2030. Guess what? We're running out before then. Clovis, Portales, and Texaco. Those are three I can name right away. We're all working very closely together because we can see we're not going to make it to that finish line. If that finish line arrives, even by 2030, we don't even know that it will still. But I can tell you this, what about your infrastructure? Do you have to look at that when you're planning within your city? Portales's water infrastructure is really bad. They have massive leaks continually that they're dealing with and trying to get stopped. And we're having those conversations too. Will you have the infrastructure to transmit the water from the Ute Reservoir all the way in? Currently, the answer to that is no, not for Portales, but yes for Clovis. So again, it's going back to the importance of the planning and preparation, because we did do the infrastructure preparation and Portales didn't know about doing the infrastructure preparation. So really planning for success is we've got to begin with the end in mind. What do we know? What does it say? Where are we headed? We must engage the community to create ownership. And we honored the voices in Clovis of cross-section of the entire community. We brought people to the table through a strategic planning effort to create what was called the Master Water Assurance Plan. We gathered all the data. We said, what are our water sources? What is my hydrologic reality? We were fortunate in that we have a paleo channel out by Cannon Air Force Base, and it has approximately 26 landowners out there. Actually, that's the action number, okay? So we have 26 out there. Here's the amazing thing. Those agricultural producers solved the issue themselves. They solved the data. They engaged in the data and the conversations, and they said voluntarily, we have to cease irrigation farming. We have to cease, LaDonna. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to accomplish that? And I don't have the time to go in how we did accomplish that and got them to do that. But I love these people. I mean, I work very closely with these people and my heart just like soars with pride when I talk about them, because they gave up a generational way of life to save for the many, for the greater good. And so we have about 7.2 billion gallons of water already saved from that area after we shut off all those irrigation wells and ceased that pumping. We want to talk, I want to just say, plan, implement, evaluate, revise. These four things working together are truly critical. And you have to get the plan implemented. That's what happened to Clovis. We didn't get it implemented right away. We met with resistance. But here's the thing I know about people. If you meet with resistance by city leadership, you will rise. We did it. I watched it happen. I watched the people say, okay, if you won't implement these particular plans like banking groundwater, ceasing irrigation pumping, we'll get her done. And that's what happened. So I know I'm probably over my time, so let me just say, reiterating the importance of firm scientific basis and integrity when we're planning. This comes out of the Water Security Planning Act. Have broad and effective participation grounded in collaboration and cooperation, community level involvement, and local innovation. Don't ever forget about local innovation. Things come together. People think of things that never happened before. We are living proof of that. Our model has never occurred before. To put groundwater in conservation easements in perpetuity, which is what we're getting ready to do, that's not happened before. But we're moving in that direction. So I just want to encourage you, you can do this work. It's in you. You can inspire others to join hands with you to do this work. The important thing for you to walk away with is you must do it. This is an urgent call to action. So thank you for the time I had to even share that with you. I appreciate it.
Until noon, we're going to take questions. And I would ask that you try to keep your questions short so we can hear from as many people as possible. But before we do that, I want to tell you something, and I want to ask you, you don't need to tell me, but I want to ask you how you feel about it. And I want to ask you what you will do about it. The legislature, sorry, the governor's budget, I don't know what's in the legislature's budget, is underfunding the implementation of the Water Data Act. The governor's budget is not adequately supporting the aquifer mapping program. No budgets contain any money for regional self-organization. How do you feel about that? The legislature starts next week. What will you do about it? We'd like to take questions now.
Having watched some of Norm's water advocates programs, it dawned on me as I was thinking about the legislature that to get the legislature to do what it needs to do, they need to be educated probably better than they are. And so the question I'm asking is, how do we put in the plan educating the people who do our legislation every year when they're very busy with all kinds of other things?
It's not. Hi, that was a good question. I have a partial answer to that, which is that we, at the Bureau of Geology, in addition to running the aquifer mapping and characterization monitoring program and the water data initiative, we've also started a water leaders education program that's specifically geared toward educating our decision makers, both legislators, state and federal, as well as many agency leadership of any different organization or tribal entity, anyone who wants to learn more about leading and making decisions about water and getting more informed. So I have a short little bit that you'll hear about here in a bit at the start of the lunch hour that talks about that. That is another piece that we are seeking funding for from the state to continue to support that. So that is one piece of that. And I think it's a slow moving process. And one thing to also acknowledge is that we have an unpaid legislature. So these people who are contributing to decisions for our state may or may not have the background in water. They may or may not have a day job that they also have to go to. So to find time in their day to get up to speed on some of these issues is a really hard thing to do. And I think we have to acknowledge their time and their space to engage on that. So it's a good point and it's an important issue to address. Thanks for that question.
We have a question from.
Well, Andrew's gonna. If I could add just a little bit about that too. I would just say from our planning standpoint, I mean, in addition to being unpaid, we have our citizen legislature. And we're really trying to emphasize the education component for the whole state, for everyone in the state, because I think it's really important not only that the legislators understand this, but that the people for whom they're trying to act are asking for the right types of action from those folks. So I think we're really trying to have a full reach educational campaign that we're trying to build on our mainstream website. So that's what we're trying to do for that.
I just wanted to add one thing briefly, and I think this kind of echoes what LaDonna was saying, the importance of not waiting. And that means that we can also act locally. So for example, at Bernalillo County, we just appropriated some money to jumpstart our planning effort. As some have said, we have to work in parallel with the rule formulation process. We don't have to wait for those rules to come out to get this started, and we don't have to wait for state money to flow to do this locally. And so I think it's really an all the above approach. It doesn't just involve pointing the finger at the legislature. There's a lot of institutional issues there, as was stated, you know, with an unpaid legislature. But there's things we can do locally that can affect this as well.
We have a question online from Catherine Maynard. I apologize if I say that name incorrectly, and it's from Ladonna. Curious about the term of the water conservation easements, who's holding the easements, and do the landowners benefit from those easements?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. It's a multi-tiered question. I will answer all parts. The conservation easement is a groundwater conservation easement, so it's a new concept. It's not looking at a standard conservation easement process. But originally, because we are a brand new conservancy, so keep in mind, we're 2 years in as of October. So working with us is Texas Agricultural Land Trust. They're an exceptional group, and they're mentoring me as well as helping us hold those conservation easements for now until we are accredited. When the Ogallala Land and Water Conservancy has full accreditation, then we will transfer the conservation easements from Texas Agricultural Land Trust to us. But keeping in mind that the landowners at any time, should they so choose, they have the right to move those easements to another land trust. If they lost confidence in us, if we didn't do things the way that they hoped we would, they still have that right protected. Do they benefit from the conservation easement? Absolutely. And these particular landowners are going to benefit exceptionally well because NRCS will pay 50% of that conservation easement value to that landowner, but the Department of Defense is going to match it. So they're getting 100%. That doesn't happen with conservation easements, a full 100% of that value. So our landowners will benefit not only from that, but the Department of Defense is paying all of their costs for the easement. And we could not believe that when they chose to do that. But it's this important to the Department of Defense because there's a military installation sitting in our community. And they highly value our agriculture producers and their water. And so they have compensated them really well currently in water right lease agreements for 3 years as a short-term answer. Why did we do that first? Because the water was depleting so rapidly, so we had to save it ASAP. But yes, the landowners do benefit, and I have 7 applications in play as we speak for conservation easement applications.
Yeah, we got a question over here.
Please state your name before your question.
Hi, my name is Sarah Knope. Thanks for the presentation, and thanks, Norm, for bringing up the upcoming session because the governor's budget does include quite a bit of money for buying produced water from industry and to the tune of $250 million. So my question is there any of maybe the people here who are more connected to the governor's office, could they make an argument that some of that money should be used for water data and water planning as opposed maybe, or in addition to buying produced water from industry? And also connected to that is, could somebody educate us here about, it's sometimes hard to tell as a non-insider, the complex interplay between the Office of State Engineers and the Interstate Stream Commission and this planning process that we're talking about here today, and what's happening at the governor's office with regard to produced water, I suppose. So if you could maybe talk about that sort of complex interplay.
I have no idea of what is happening in the governor's office, but I do have an opinion. And my opinion is that it is ludicrous to be thinking about $500 million for something that at its best could only give a huge contract to one of the huge international firms that does desal across the world, to come in and build a package plant somewhere with no planning, in advance to figure out where it's going. And then the other side of it that I think is ludicrous is we're underfunding water basics, period.
Hi, my name is Mary Catherine Baca. I'm with the Coronado Soil and Water Conservation District. My question is for Max. What do you see as the biggest impediment to getting landowners and water rights owners involved and engaged in this planning process?
I don't, it's a little hard. I guess we'll see once it gets started. I think that some of the challenges, I think one of the things that ISC and the planning department can do is really start with direct outreach to ag organizations, to irrigation conservancy districts, soil water conservation districts, et cetera, that already kind of have these built up networks. I think there's a lot of existing stuff, but maybe not the right connections exist at the moment. And I think, personal contact, showing up at their, that sort of thing is really going to be key rather than, sending out emails or invitations to water centric events. So I guess that would be my strategy for or advice for that. I'd be curious in your district if you have any thoughts about what you think might be the biggest impediment, though.
The producers that we've talked to are concerned with getting funding to make improvements on their land. So the landowners need money to improve the soil or improve the water systems. So I would agree with you that soil and water conservation districts are a great source for that. Our issue is outreach, like how do we reach these people? And I think that's a great suggestion to go to their events. I was wondering if you had any other, maybe Andrew, if you have any other suggestions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Certainly going to the events is one of these pieces. For anyone who's not aware, agriculture uses more water than any other sector within the state by a not insignificant margin. It's hard to quantify exactly because there's return flows and it's all very complicated, but speaking broadly, that's the case. So for our side, actually, I think that's really like the biggest issue that we're facing with how to make this successful. And frankly, working with agricultural producers is a big part of the whole purpose of doing this. Rural communities and agricultural producers are in a lot of ways the most vulnerable water users that we have in the state and the most likely to benefit isn't quite the word I'm looking for, but like the people who are most directly involved in water use who have the greatest opportunity to have something of their issues addressed through the process. And it's the group that we seem to have a trust deficit with working with, which I think is related, right? I mean, if your water right is part of your livelihood, this is hitting pretty close to where you live. I mean, Norm described this as existential, which I think is true for everyone, but it's even more so for the agricultural community. So we're going to hope to participate in that and really go in with both ears open, as Commissioner Smina mentioned earlier, and see what we can learn from that community and how to work with them the best. So, yeah.
Got a question back here.
It's the same question I had for Norm. Thanks y'all, thanks. It's James Skeets. I'm really, you might say we don't have water running in our backyard. Everything that we do on a farm, 95% of the water that we get comes from the rooftops. We don't have a well. So the challenges are there. We take probably a shower once a week or sometimes twice. Forgive me for that. But the one thing that I'm hearing throughout the group is there has to be some kind of cultural competency attached to all these policies. And the policies, it's not top down, it's bottom up. And I've seen that over and over, that the community getting together. So the competency has a role. We have to get over our white fragility. And as Native people, we have to get over our bitterness for stealing water, squatting on land, stealing our land. We got to get over that. So in saying that, I think we need a lot of the scientists to get out to our area and begin to communicate some of this information so that you can realize that there is a relationship that has to be built, a partnership that has to be built. So that involves competency. What I'm not hearing is really, when I was working with the healthcare system, we changed that word competency to cultural humility. And I think that's the challenge that we're going to have is how do we contextualize that information locally? So that people realize that they have a stake in it, they have a partnership in it, and we're not gonna continue to speak over their heads. We're not gonna continue to make decisions apart from them being involved. And with Indigenous people, I think it's really important to get that relationship going with the tribes and making that effort. I haven't seen any folks out that are water policies out, except for a few of the ones that have come out to be in meetings. I think those need to happen more and more. We got to get it over ourselves. The word American doesn't come from American Vespucci. It comes from the word that the Brits used to say, the colonizers there in the New World, the word American they used to use was to say those Indians. So you Indians, you all need to get together and be a part of some of this stuff, all in our areas. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, James. Thank you for making the trip from Gallup.
Ella Jones Fenoglio, private citizen. Tough act to follow, my beloved ski. I heard in a recent Interfaith Power and Light presentation that the oil and gas wells use a great deal of fresh water to produce oil and gas. And I know we haven't been in that area today in any way. We're planning with human beings and communities in Clovis. But is there something we can do at the legislature to reform the Oil and Gas Act? Joan, help me, is there an act? Oil and gas?
Yes.
There is, it's not out yet.
Okay.
I could say something.
A proposed Oil and Gas Act. That's another area to lobby. I'm just putting that in the space, but I don't want to distract us from our beautiful cultural issues and everything else. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jacqueline Burdine. I work for the Drinking Water Bureau. So it's fantastic to see that we're bringing the tribes into it. I think that that is something that is very important, working with state engineers in the past, working up in Jemez and things like that. However, I'm also Spanish born and raised New Mexican. And I don't see that, and maybe it's that I haven't delved into it, but that there's also our other cultures. So we do have a very big Hispanic, of course, people here, especially with our agriculture and stuff like that. So I'm wondering if when you make the tribal communities as part of this, if there's going to be people who are on ag and who are going to be representatives for their communities. So at Drinking Water Bureau, we're doing like water institutes to help people with their drinking water and give them that information. I think that involving those people, not just the Acequias, but involving these other people and going to these areas is important, because I'm from up north and people are very clannish, as I like to say. And so unfortunately, they're not going to take it from, as James said, from the Indian or American people, right? They're going to want to hear from somebody in their own community. And so we need to get those people on board in order to, and not just talking, but have them involved in part of a committee. Because when they say, hey, Joe Sanchez from Mora is now on the committee for this, and he's going to be speaking for us, I think that that's really important, because then they're going to understand that that community is now being spoken for, instead of somebody coming in and saying, this is what you need to do, this is what you're doing wrong. So that's just something to throw out there. It's not necessarily a question, but just maybe making sure that we involve them in some sort of commission or community aspect to get everybody involved.
Any comments to that from the board?
No, if I could respond.
I just wanted to say on that subject, it brought to mind the community of Carnuel, New Mexico. If you're not familiar with it, it's just a few minutes outside of Albuquerque. But this is a land grant community, Hispanic, Indigenous land grant community of mixed background, as all of us are really. But it's, again, to that point, it's really important to have those local ambassadors because our water authority utility staff is excellent. We have great engineers and outreach specialists, but when it comes from the community itself, so working with the land grant leadership, the families that actually live there and work there and know the community, that's where we can really drive, whether it's getting easements signed or getting hookups to the system. Our staff can go in there and do their best, but really the most effective messenger is engaging that community. And that's something that we're working really hard with to really reach out to the land grant and make sure that they are the face of this project, not the utility.
I would also add that the Water Security Planning Act contains explicit requirements for the state to support and engage rural communities.
And if I could add just a little bit too, I think in addition to rural communities, I believe agricultural communities are called out in the act. So there we go, the Sequia communities, thank you. I should also mention there's an empty seat up here, which was going to be Paula Garcia's seat. So that would have been someone who could speak more directly to the Sequia component of this. I forgot to mention, because basically 7 minutes sounds like a lot before you have 300 eyes on you. But you know, I actually moved over some of the stuff I intended to talk about too quickly. One of those pieces actually Commissioner Sweeney mentioned, which is the work with the Indian Affairs Department. And we're working full speed ahead with Lori Riaki, the same woman who Dr. Dunbar mentioned earlier, who helped us with the work that we did during the 50-year water plan to address that aspect and come up with some implementation strategies. In parallel to that, we're trying to figure out how to best work with the Sequias. Sequias are fantastic, a credible part of the state. They're also difficult to work with in a coordinated way because part of the beauty of the Sequias is this kind of replicable, very democratic model of how to do things. There are hundreds of the Sequias at least, and trying to work with all of them individually is probably beyond our team of 3. We are currently trying to work with the Sequia Association, actually saw Serafina here, and also Dr. Connie Maxwell, so I'm trying to get the doctors in there properly. That we're working with them as a partner on a project that they actually proposed and got a grant for to do some work for the Sequia Association and WRI, working together to look at some of the benefits of the Sequia irrigation and how the hydrology works in those communities. And I shouldn't speak to their project, it's a wonderful project. Ask them about it and they can tell you in more detail, but we are definitely looking in that direction and trying to figure out how best to address that and continue to be open to suggestions of how to do it even better.
Thanks. I think we've just got time for one more question here.
My name is Elizabeth Chestnut, and I've been involved with Pueblos forever. I used to work here. I happened to be sitting with a group of groundwater people, and what came to mind when we brought up work in New Mexico is Taos in 2020. I was at Feast Day, and that was the year that they forbid Pueblo people at Taos from having gardens. And the water situation there, also the Sequias had the same exact situations. They were talking to each other. I don't know what happened as a result of that, but this is a really delicate question. Tourism is huge in the state. And one of the things that was said to me at the table in Taos was that the hotels there, the wealthy hotels, were draining the water system. And one of the reasons they didn't have enough water then, as opposed to Clovis, is there wasn't any. And there wasn't surface water and there wasn't groundwater, both. And one of the things I see my husband dealt for a long time with public water rights, and I think there's been an enormous amount of progress there. And also, even in this group, having the act specifically acknowledge tribal participation, that has changed a lot. But this business about groundwater, which is not regulated like surface water, has got to be addressed around the state, because I think a lot of people don't understand that when it's gone, it's gone. And the Oklahoma, I actually know someone who's a farmer who lost his farm in the 80s because they couldn't get the groundwater anywhere to receive it that much. It's also happening in northeastern New Mexico. And I don't know, this thing about crisis on the Chaco Canyon basically got depopulated very suddenly, actually, because of the lack of water. And I don't know, not everybody acknowledges that, and I'm saying that there are plenty of efforts being made. There are actually very specific proposals that are being made by people on the panel. I'm very impressed, because 4 years ago, these things did not exist, and I had to come to one of these and since the pandemic started, but it is something to be thinking about. We once thought about this before. Then, complicated relationship between ISC and other water, you know, the water users. But I mean, the political thing still is regional, and maybe it's true, maybe you do have to have absolute regional responses to this kind of thing, like up north, Taos is different from down, say, Espanola. Anyway, it's more of a comment than a question, but to raise again the legal issues around groundwater and how it's being framed. I don't know if I have a question for anybody on that.
It is time for lunch.
And really quick, Lori, who's going to be leading the afternoon session, wants to just talk to y'all for 1 minute. I also wanted to say, this is the Water Security Planning Act. There's sticky notes, so if you have any comments that you want to capture, feel free, and please do put them there. Lori, go for it, and thank you all.
So just a very brief announcement and request. We are going to reset the room while you're at lunch for our afternoon session. And part of that involves setting up the tables a little differently. So I'm asking if you all would either leave your stuff on your chairs or take it with you so we don't have to disturb whatever is left on the table. And to the extent that we're going to finish by 12:30, that would be great. And so also, okay, that's it. So
really not.
reset, take your stuff on your chairs.
And everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, the lunch buffet is out there. There's gonna be 2 lines on each side. You only have 45 minutes to keep on your table, so
I've had a
please
couple
move the line,
photographs,
sit down,
and we
and
have
we will be
it.
setting up for the afternoon session at 12:30.
Oh, all right, so yeah.